Now, I'm sure you are familiar with these iceberg tiers and iceberg videos on YouTube. They've become very popular in the Formula 1 community too. Some of them are gone very well, some of them are not gone so well, others were left in the dust, what might have been. But I'm here to make my own Formula 1 iceberg video, and to avoid copyright from FOM and Formula 1, I'm going to do what Peter Brook did in his 2 iceberg videos. Just a couple of images with background music. But please guys, do not snag me for content stealing, it's YouTube. At some point, a YouTuber has copied another video from another YouTuber, so please allow it. But anyway, enough waffling, let's get started to the Formula 1 iceberg. Tier 1, Michael Schumacher. I don't want to spend too much time on him, considering Tier 1 is meant to be the easy part where all the topics are elaborated easily, and there are more topics written about him in the other tiers below. Michael Schumacher is the most relevant Formula 1 driver of all time, and also the first driver to have claimed 7 titles. He made his debut at the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix when Belgian driver Bertrand Gachon was imprisoned for spraying CS gas to a taxi driver, and at the next race was picked up by Benetton. He got his first podium and win in 1992, won only one race in 1993 in Portugal, won his first championship in 1994, then his second in 1995, and in 1996 joined Ferrari with the goal of making the team capable of winning races and fighting for championships, becoming the first driver to do so since Jody Scheckter in 1979. The first season was obviously difficult, and he had one of the worst title defenses in Formula 1 history, finishing 3rd on 59 points. The second season was much more easier, the car was a lot better, and he could have won the 1997 title had it not been for a suspicious collision with Jacques Villeneuve, which we'll discuss later in this iceberg video. He lost another chance of winning the title with Ferrari in 1998 because of the puncture in Suzuka, but in 1999, things took a turn for the worse. At the British Grand Prix, his rear brakes failed coming through Stowe. He flew across the track and in the gravel, but he still hit the wall at 100 miles per hour. He was taken care at the Northampton hospital after injuring his leg, and then missed the next 6 races, but came back in the final 2 races and finished 2nd in both Malaysia and Japan. In 2000, after 5 seasons of pain and hard work, he finally won his first World Championship with Ferrari, securing it at the penultimate round in Suzuka, and then won another 4 on the trot between 2001 and 2004. But in 2005, because of FIA's doping rules, Ferrari lost all their dominance, and Schumacher lost the feeling of victory. In 2006, however, Ferrari and Schumi came back with redemption. However, after Schumacher's victory in Monza, he announced his retirement during the post-race press conference. In the final 3 races, he performed valiantly. He won his last race of his career in China, had an engine failure in Japan, but still with a mathematical chance of winning the championship, as if Alonso did not finish and Schumacher won the race, he would win on countback. Alas, he finished 4th with Alonso 2nd, finishing 2nd, 13 points behind Alonso. 4 years later though, he came back to the sport, but he wasn't as fast enough. The biggest highlight he had with Mercedes between 2010 to 2012 was his last ever podium in Formula 1 at the 2012 European Grand Prix. His final race in Brazil was highlighted by this epic battle with Kimi Räikkönen and giving 6th place to Sebastian Vettel to help him secure his 3rd title. And so that was it. Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton is the second most relevant Formula 1 driver and the second driver to have claimed 7 titles. He made his F1 debut in 2007 with McLaren, after impressing him in his GP2 career a year earlier. He got his first podium in his very first race in Australia, and then just 5 races later won his first Grand Prix in an action-packed race in Canada. In the 15th round in Fuji, he took a commanding pole and win, and with his 2 closest rivals Alonso and Raikkonen being 12 and 17 points behind respectively, he was on course to win the championship on his very first year in Formula 1. However, 2 unforgivable errors in the last 2 races meant that Hamilton lost the title to Kimi Räikkönen by 1 point. He came back stronger in 2008 though, this time fighting with Felipe Massa, and after a last corner pass on Timo Glock, Lewis won the title by 1 point. The rule changes of 2009 meant that Hamilton had a horrific first half season. The second half was a lot better, winning Hungary and Singapore, but just like Schumacher in 1996, Hamilton had a terrible title defense. In 2010, he looked like a title contender, winning 3 times, but previous errors prevented him from winning it, and he finished 4th. 2011 was a hard year for Lewis on and off the track. He was beaten by his teammate Jenson Button in the standings and had various collisions with Felipe Massa. 2012 wasn't much better. On one hand, yes, McLaren had built a rocket that season. On the other, Hamilton had numerous gearbox failures here and there. By the end of September 2012, Hamilton announced he was moving to Mercedes for 2013, and he did so, but only won one race. In 2014 though, Niki Lauda transformed the team into a supremacy, and Hamilton and Rosberg drove away into the distance as the only championship contenders. Hamilton won the title in Abu Dhabi, but the tense rivalry between his teammate Nico Rosberg made the pair enemies. In 2015, he had no challenge from Nico Rosberg, so he won his third title with relative ease. In 2016 though, things started to change. Rosberg was a strong title contender and greatly benefited from Hamilton's engine failure in Malaysia to win the title by 5 points. In 2017 and 2018, Hamilton had an exciting battle with Sebastian Vettel, which Hamilton won both of them, and then walked it in 2019 and 2020. In 2021, Hamilton had another tense championship battle with Max Verstappen this time, and after an emotional rollercoaster and tense wheel-to-wheel action, the season was won by Max Verstappen. In 2022, Mercedes was no longer dominant, and that meant for the first time ever in his Formula 1 career, Hamilton went winless in an F1 season. In 2023, before even the season started, plenty of people predicted for Lewis Hamilton to win his 8th world title, but unfortunately for those who had these predictions, as of this date of me writing this script on October 2nd, 2023, he's currently 3rd in the championship on 190 points and inevitably come out winless once again. Despite that, his driving was and is always on point, matching and beating the same wins of Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher, and being a world-class driver in general. Super Max. Super Max is a song made by Pit Stop Boys dedicated to, of course, Max Verstappen. That's all I gotta say about this one. Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive is basically a Netflix series about F1 that was made in March 2019. Currently, they're on the 5th season. Personally, I don't watch it, and I suggest you shouldn't too, because in the words of Into the Barrier, it's good on entertainment value, but it's also good on inventing drama. Canada 2019. I'm honestly fuming, to the point where I don't even want to explain what happened in that race. So, it's the 2019 Canadian Grand Prix. Sebastian Vettel is on pole, and when the light went out, he defended himself from being overtaken by Lewis Hamilton and maintained his lead. Behind him though, there was carnage. Alex Albon was sandwiched between Sergio Perez and Antonio Giovinazzi, causing him to make contact with Giovinazzi, in which the front wing came off and a huge chunk of it got stuck in Roman Grosjean's right side of the halo, in which he had to throw it away with his hand. On lap 9, Lando Norris's rear right brakes failed on Casino Straight just before the World of Champions, causing him to stop at the pit exit and retire with the brakes erupting in flames. On lap 48, Sebastian Vettel made an error on turn 3 and went into the grass. Lewis Hamilton spotted an opportunity to go past him for the lead, but Vettel rejoined the track, putting him tight onto the apex. 9 laps later, the stewards gave Seb a 5-second time penalty for unsafe re-entry and forcing another driver off the track. Vettel crossed the line in first, but it was Hamilton who took the win and Vettel was second. Vettel was furious and swapped the driver podium boards. Now let's hop into both sides of the argument. The FIA, Hamilton fans and Lewis Hamilton himself said it was a dangerous entry, but realistically speaking, Vettel had no other choice but to rejoin the way he did, because if he had gone more to the left, he would have lost control and hit the wall, which would trigger a safety car. The safest thing he could do was to rejoin the track in the middle with Hamilton lifting off, and that's what happened. If he had gone more to the right, that or Lewis Hamilton not lifting when he rejoined the track in the middle, then both of them would have crashed, destroying their afternoons. Sebastian Vettel legitimately had nowhere to go. When you're on the grass, it is expected that the car would do a small oversteer and the driver would try their best to keep the car straight and also try their best not to crash their opponent into the wall. If the Hamilton fans try to eulogize the FIA for investigation accuracy, they will obviously point out the 10th place grid penalty Michael Schumacher got for deliberately putting Barrichello on the wall in Hungary 2010, the drive-through penalty Sebastian Vettel got for pushing Fernando Alonso off the track in Italy 2012, and the penalty Max Verstappen got for colliding with Kimi Raikkonen in Japan 2018. Well, to them I say, Michael Schumacher purposely made Rubens Barrichello lock up and drive onto the grass in the US GP of 2005 and he didn't get anything. Lewis Hamilton himself on his charge up the field in Monza in 2008 overtook Timo Glock on the first turn and then forced Timo's car half on the grass and half on the track and he didn't get anything. Nico Rosberg pushed Alonso in the sand in Bahrain 2012, and nothing came out of it other than a classic team radio from Alonso. And guess what? Sebastian Vettel himself made a similar action with Hamilton again, this time in Spain 2017. The Brit went off the track on the first turn and nothing happened. And on the sprint race in Austria 2023, Sergio Perez pushed Max Verstappen onto the grass, which would have ended both of their races, but still no penalty. Oh, and for all the Hamilton fans, once again Lewis Hamilton was involved in another popular collision, this time with Max Verstappen in Silverstone 2021, but Hamilton got only a 10-second penalty for that. Oh yeah, that nicely leads us on to the next topic. 2021 was robbed. This is a classic phrase that Hamilton fans use to describe the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which the Max Verstappen fans will obviously try to defend this for lack of criticism. But the fact is, outside of Abu Dhabi, there are a few races that do raise a few eyebrows of deliberate crashes and conspiracy theories. The first controversial race is Silverstone. Verstappen and Hamilton collided on lap 1, coming through corps. Hamilton received a 10-second time penalty for his upcoming pit stop. He dropped to 4th but made his way through the front runners. He was then closing up on Leclerc and took advantage when the Monegasque went wide into corps, helping him to win the race. Next up, Hungary. Lewis Hamilton slammed his car on pole and when the lights went out, kept his first place. Meanwhile, his teammate Valtteri Bottas qualified second but has a poor start and was passed by both Red Bulls and Lando Norris. However, he locked up and drove into the back of him, causing the McLaren driver to make contact with Max, and Valtteri made contact with Sergio Perez too. The race was red flagged, and during the red flag, cameras showed the right side pod damage Verstappen's car had after the collision with Lando Norris. On their way to the grid, Lewis Hamilton was the only driver not to pit for slicks. He was the only one who started on the red lights and tried to build a gap. But when he pitted on lap 5, he found himself all the way down in 13th, right behind his title rival Max Verstappen. Hamilton moved his way up through the field whilst Verstappen moved nowhere. In the dying laps, Hamilton was pressured to the absolute limit by Fernando Alonso. The Spaniard's majestic defence continued that way until lap 65, when he locked up into the first turn. This gave the opportunity for Hamilton to overtake him and move up to 4th. He later passed Carlos Sainz for 3rd and was extraordinarily closing up on 2nd place Vettel. In the end, he finished 3rd, behind Vettel and race winner Ocon. Verstappen meanwhile scored 1 point, but both drivers benefited from Vettel's disqualification after the race, and so Hamilton and Verstappen finished 2nd and 9th. The Italian Grand Prix is up next, and in the sprint qualifying both drivers start 1st and 4th. Verstappen lost the lead to Ricciardo going into turn 1 and was alongside Hamilton coming through the second chicane. But the pair collided the same way they did in Imola and Hamilton was forced off the track. On the first round of pit stops, Max Verstappen had a shocking 11.1 second pit stop and dropped to 9th. Lewis Hamilton's first stop was also slow, but not as slow as Verstappen's. Norris got ahead of Hamilton and now Verstappen was now alongside him. Hamilton attempted to defend his line and push the Dutchman to the outside, but Max hit a sausage curb and flew on top of Hamilton's monocoque, causing both of them to retire. After the race, Hamilton and Verstappen were summoned to the stewards regarding their crash. Ultimately, Verstappen took the blame and was handed a 3-place grid penalty for the following round in Russia. In the last 4 races, 3 of them have been extremely controversial. In Sao Paulo, Verstappen was in 2nd, whilst Hamilton got a 5-place grid penalty and was dropped to 10th. Verstappen took the lead by turn 2 and Hamilton was already up to 5th by the first lap. By lap 19, Hamilton was already up to 2nd and on lap 48 was gaining on Verstappen, until he made his move on Desida de Largo, where he was forced so wide off the track that even Verstappen himself went off. The FIA strangely thought no investigation was needed, and so Max wasn't penalised. 10 laps later, Hamilton was close to Verstappen again, but Max was weaving all over the place to prevent Hamilton from any overtaking opportunity. A lap later, however, Hamilton made the move stick with DRS and went on to win with Verstappen 2nd. In Saudi Arabia, Hamilton and Verstappen qualified 1st and 3rd and stayed that way after the first turn. On lap 10, Mick Schumacher went off the track, which triggered a safety car. Later, the race was suspended and Verstappen and Red Bull took advantage of this by making a pit stop, as with the new regulations you are allowed to do that. On lap 15, the race was restarted and Hamilton got the better start and pushed Verstappen wide, hoping he would back off. But Max cut the corner and forced Hamilton to go wide and was overtaken by Ocon. Behind them, there was carnage. Max Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez was tapped from behind by Charles Leclerc, causing him to hit the wall and lose his front wing. And Nikita Mazepin drove into the back of George Russell, triggering a second red flag. Because Max cut the chicane to gain an advantage over his title rival Lewis Hamilton, he would start 3rd at the restart, behind Hamilton and Ocon. Verstappen found a gap and took the lead whilst Hamilton and Ocon touched. A couple of laps later and Hamilton got DRS trying to pass Verstappen into turn 1. Verstappen once again left him no room and cut the corner. The steward saw it as an illegal overtake and so Max was told to give the position back to Hamilton. Max then purposely brake checked Hamilton, which the stewards only gave him a 10-second penalty. After all this mayhem, Hamilton won the race with Verstappen second, going into the final round in Abu Dhabi on level points. The final race of the season is the icing on the cake of FIA foul-ups. Verstappen gets pole with Hamilton second, but Hamilton got a better start and was up into first before he even got to turn 1. But coming into turn 6, Verstappen dived down the inside to take the lead, but Hamilton went off the track to maintain position. Verstappen was expecting the FIA to inform Hamilton to give the place back, but the FIA oddly chose not to inspect any investigation and so Hamilton was still in first. On lap 14 and 15, both drivers made their first pit stop to change to the hard compound tyres. Lap 20 and Sergio Perez stayed on his soft tyres to try to back off Hamilton as much as he could. It held him for one lap but it closed the gap that Hamilton had over Verstappen from 11 seconds to 1 second. Hamilton eventually got past him, but Perez played the ultimate mind game that reduced his lead that Hamilton had been building. Nothing else happened after that until the illustrious lap 53, when Nicholas Latifi crashed and brought out the safety car. The FIA first decided that lapped cars are not allowed to overtake, but then out of the blue on lap 57 they announced that the 5 lapped cars ahead of Verstappen are allowed to overtake the safety car and not lap themselves. On the last lap, Hamilton and Verstappen battled for the lead, and Verstappen made his second lunge of the race and took the lead from Hamilton's hands. Hamilton tried to take the lead back by getting some slipstream, but it failed. Max crossed the line to become controversially the first Dutch world champion. The 2021 season was full of drama and controversy. Us F1 fans just wanted to sit back and watch 20 professional drivers battle it out on track. But Michael Masi's wacky decision within the FIA stewards room dashed the entire meaning of the word racing. Throughout the season, the FIA handed out soft penalties to the championship contenders. This was done intentionally for Hamilton and Verstappen to be level on points going into the final round and get the showdown they so dearly wanted and needed. If we penalise the two drivers equitably, then the championship will change dramatically. Let's start with Hamilton's penalty in Silverstone. He only got a 10-second penalty for ending Verstappen's race, and the reason I say only is because it could have been far, far worse. To give you an idea, in Brazil 2019, he got a 5-second time penalty for causing a collision with Alex Albon, and then made contact with Albon again at the season opener in Austria in 2020. This time he got a 3-place grid penalty, demoting him from 2nd to 5th. Max Verstappen got a 3-place grid penalty for the following round in Russia after his collision with Hamilton in Italy, and Valtteri Bottas got a 5-place grid penalty for the following round in Belgium after his first collision in Hungary. So you'd expect the same penalty to be given to Hamilton. So, Hamilton gets a 3-place grid penalty, Leclerc wins the Grand Prix, and Hamilton drops to 4th. In Hungary, there are a few raised eyebrows about Bottas' crash. If you look from the onboard footage, it's either a lock-up or him intentionally hitting the back of the McLaren for both Red Bulls to crash. It has caused quite a bit of controversy within the F1 community. Bottas had space to sweep it to the left and not crash into anybody, so let's be generous to say he moves to the left, doesn't crash, and Verstappen runs in second behind Hamilton. Hungary is Hamilton's most dominant circuit, as he had won 8 times already, so let's make it his 9th victory with Verstappen finishing second. In Italy, Max Verstappen was rightly punished for his collision with Hamilton, no change needed. In Interlagos, Max Verstappen forced Lewis Hamilton off the track on lap 48, but the stewards gave no investigation for all this. Max Verstappen should have been given a 10-second stop-go penalty, which would have dropped him behind Bottas. But I do believe he would have passed Bottas eventually. So Verstappen doesn't drop any further back and Hamilton and Verstappen finish in the same spots. Saudi Arabia though is a big mess. Verstappen was rightfully given a 5-second time penalty for gaining an advantage in cutting the corner on lap 36. But on lap 37, when he was told to give the place back, he purposely brake-checked Hamilton and was only given a 10-second time penalty, which would have gone as far as disqualification, so let's be realistic and give Max the disqualification. And finally, Abu Dhabi. When Verstappen dived down the inside on turn 6, he barely gave room to Lewis Hamilton, in which the Brit was forced to miss the chicane completely. A year later, this exact same moment happened with Carlos Sainz this time. Hamilton mounted the thin sausage curb and maintained his position. It took the FIA 3 laps to make the decision, and eventually Hamilton was told on the radio to give the position back to Sainz. The same action should have been done there as well. And then there's the screw up for the lapped cars behind the safety car. For the sake of the FIA wanting a last lap showdown, let's say that all lapped cars are allowed to overtake the safety car, and unlapped themselves. But on lap 56 out of 58, just as in real time when they announced that lapped cars were not allowed to overtake. So, Verstappen pits as planned, overtakes Hamilton just like he did, and wins the race with Hamilton second. The new points leaderboard looks like this. Verstappen still wins the title, 14 points ahead of Lewis on 408.5 and Hamilton on 394.5. In summary, it wasn't just the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix that robbed the Drivers' Championship. Almost the entire second half of the season was full of controversy and dense FIA decisions from Michael Massey. Is that Glock? It's the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix. It was the title showdown between Lewis Hamilton at McLaren and Felipe Massa at Ferrari. When the lights went out, Felipe Massa stormed through the lead going into the Senna S. Hamilton meanwhile qualified 4th and stayed 4th by the first corner. When Hamilton pitted on lap 11, he dropped to 7th. He passed Trulli and Fisichella to move up to 5th and on course for the title. On lap 66 however, rain came down on the circuit, forcing almost everyone to pit, except the two Toyotas of Glock and Trulli. On lap 68, Hamilton was passed by Vettel, demoting him to 6th. On lap 71, Massa took the checkered flag to become F1 champion. Also, he thought. The rain got heavier, and when Glock was in 4th place, still on dry tyres, he was passed by both Vettel and Hamilton, in which created the well-known phrase of
"Is that Glock? Is that Glock going slowly?
It is,
That's
it's Glock!"
This moved Hamilton back into 5th, and with that, became the 2008 Formula 1 World Champion. But here comes Sebastian Vettel. It's the 2018 Belgian Grand Prix. Hamilton is on pole and covers Sebastian Vettel at the start to maintain his lead. Behind the two, chaos assumes, but the green flag is still waved. Going through Eau Rouge and Radion, Vettel was still behind Hamilton's rear wing and at the Kemmel Straight spotted an opportunity to go past, which gave David Croft an ultimate orgasm and said,
But here comes Sebastian Vettel!
The safety car was quickly deployed during the turn 1 impact, and Vettel was unchallenged from then on, taking the win. Through goes Hamilton. In an already chaotic British Grand Prix in 2022, Leclerc, Perez and Hamilton were battling it out, with Alonso and Norris not so far behind. By the end of lap 45, Perez got DRS and chased down Charles Leclerc into Stowe. The pair made contact on the penultimate corner, which allowed Hamilton to pass both of them, which also made David Croft say one of his famous quotes.
Through goes Hamilton! Unbelievable stuff!
The Silverstone crowd roared, but Hamilton lost second to Perez going past Village and eventually finished 3rd, taking the fastest lap of the race. Max Verstappen kicking things. On the final laps of the 2021 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Max Verstappen lost control and hit the wall on the long straight just before lap 47. The cause of his crash was because he suffered a left rear puncture. In his anger, he kicked his car, and it became a green screen meme across the F1 community. Tier 2. Sigma Alonso. Sigma Alonso is a meme for Fernando Alonso apparently being a Sigma male. It's on point, considering he has the jawline, the faces he pulls when the camera is recording him, and his precision of pulling birds in Aston Martin just like he did with Renault. Indianapolis 2005. The new tyre rule changes of 2005 were made to terminate the Ferrari and Michael Schumacher dominance. In essence, changing tyres was not allowed and they had to run with one tyre stint for the entirety of a race. Unless if you got a puncture, then you could change tyres, but only that specific one that had the puncture. So, come Friday practice for the USGP and Ralf Schumacher had a left rear tyre failure and crashed into the banking of turn 13. Strange, considering he crashed on the same spot a year before and had broken his back, same with Alonso, but since then the track had been paved smoother for the upcoming 2005 race. Ricardo Zonta replaced Ralf Schumacher, but he too had the same issue. There were two complications. The track was actually grooved, which benefited the Bridgestone tyres over the Michelin tyres, and that the tyre wear was unusually high. This information came from the tyre company Firestone, owned by Bridgestone, as they had to interchange their tyres to cope with the grooved track at the 2005 Indy 500. Bridgestone also changed their tyres to have higher tyre pressure, same with Michelin after their tyres were taken to France to be surveyed. However, despite being furnished with higher pressure tyres, there were still some issues with the Michelin tyres. Sunday came and it was certified that the Michelin tyres would not last the distance. There was 4 options to solve the Michelin problem. Option 1 was to install a temporary chicane on the banking of turn 13. It was done at the 1994 Spanish Grand Prix, where they positioned a bunch of tyres after the tragic death of Ayrton Senna. Option 2 was for the Michelin runners to pit every 10 laps. It was stated that the tyres would not last 10 laps anyway, so if they had gone with option 2, the Michelin runners would have to make 7 pit stops. Option 3 was for the Michelin runners to either go through the pit lane on every lap or take the turn 13 banking at reduced speed. And option 4 was basically option 3 but to be run as a non-championship event. Out of all these 4 options, you must always pick option 5, postpone the event and save it for later in the year or the following year. It turned out neither of these options were agreed. The chicane was never in place due to Jean Todt of Ferrari saying no, and the FIA president himself, Max Mosley, being strict and refused to imply the chicane. The option of making a pit stop every 10 laps on the track with 73 laps was ridiculous. Option 3 and 4 were both denied by the FIA, and they didn't even think about postponing the race. So the grid went on the formation lap as planned, but all 14 of the Michelin runners went straight into the pits and did not start the race. Paul Stoddart of Manali and Colin Collins of Jordan both agreed not to race, but as Colin Collins sent his Jordan drivers out to try to manipulate Stoddart, Stoddart had no other option but to send his Manali drivers out to race as hope of still challenging Jordan in the Constructors' Championship. The spectators were in utter disbelief as they could not understand why 14 out of the 20 cars went straight to the pit lane and only 6 cars on the grid were about to start the race. The race went ahead, and the spectators quickly understood after a few laps what was happening, resulting them to jeer, write unsympathetic charts about Max Mosley, and throw beer and water bottles onto the circuit, which Rubens Barrichello ran over one of the water bottles on lap 6. Nothing happened much in the race, apart from the second round of pit stops where Schumacher came out of the pits and Barrichello was alongside him heading into turn 1 with an opportunity to take the lead of the race, but Schumacher sent him into the grass as he would not let go of this victory. When all was said and done, Schumacher took his and Ferrari's only win of the season. Barrichello finished second to make it a Ferrari 1-2, Thiago Monteiro completing the podium to record Jordan's first and only podium of the season, and Thiago himself became the first and so far only Portuguese driver to stand on an F1 podium. Narain Karthikeyan finishing 4th to record his one and only time of scoring points in his F1 career, and the first for an Indian ever, and the Minardis of Christian Albers and Patrick Fies-Saka in 5th and 6th. This race could have and probably should have been postponed to remove the groove from the surface on turn 13 and other parts of the circuit and let the Grand Prix be held later in the season or the following year with the spectators getting their money back. However, with the actions of Jean Todt and Max Mosley, destroyed any chances this race had to be postponed for the better. Don't get me wrong, Jean Todt had his own reasons to say no. The tyre rules of 2005 were hurting Ferrari and Bridgestone, so he had no desire for Michelin's miracles to happen. But a possibility of what a race could have been transformed into undoubtedly the worst Formula 1 race of all time. Lance Stroll is a paid driver. I mean, it's obvious that he is one. His seats with Williams and Racing Point Force India were paid by his billionaire father, Lawrence Stroll, and then Lawrence rebranded Racing Point into Aston Martin for assurance that his son would still be in Formula 1. This season of 2023, he has been drowning like no other season previously, and the F1 community demand Lawrence Stroll to fire his own son so we can finally see Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso as teammates, which will probably see this scenario happening not in a million years from now. Go Tiffy. Go Tiffy is a meme for Nicholas Latifi being the greatest of all time. How can he disregard such facts when it has been proven that he is the GOAT after setting the fastest lap in FP3 at the 2022 Hungarian Grand Prix? Canada 2011. This is unquestionably the greatest Formula 1 race of all time. During Friday practice, Sebastian Vettel became the 4th victim of the Wall of Champions, locking both front tyres, mounted the curb, and the result was as follows. There was also a hilarious moment just right after Seb's crash. A marshal ran onto the track to pick up the debris, but he tripped and fell on his face. In qualifying though, it was unadventurous, with Sebastian taking his 6th pole position of the year, with the Ferraris right behind him. On Sunday, Montreal went from sunny to rainy, and so the race started behind the safety car. Jaime Alguersuari started from the pit lane, despite not setting a lap under the 107 percentile rule, though he still was permitted to race. After the safety car came in, Fernando Alonso was hunting down Sebastian Vettel for the lead. Sebastian restrained Alonso's opportunity to overtake him. Behind them, Hamilton and Webber banged wheels, and Lewis sent the Red Bull number 2 driver into a spin. Hamilton dropped to 7th, whilst Webber was outside the points in 14th and a lot of work to do. On lap 8, Hamilton tried to make up ground and attempted to move on his teammate Jenson Button. Jenson, however, did not see him and squeezed him into the pit wall. Lewis was out with broken rear suspension. Button changed to intermediates, but was soon given a drive-through penalty for speeding behind the safety car, dropping him to 15th place. Button was fast on the intermediates, and so the paddock was thinking really hard about whether they should bring their drivers to change to intermediates or let them stay out in case the rain gets heavier. On lap 19, heavy rain arrived, and so those that stayed on the wet, it paid off wonderfully for them, but those that changed to inters, they lost vulnerable time for having to pit again for wets. The heavy rain turned into thunderstorm. The Grand Prix was red flagged, hoping that the storm would alleviate into light rain. During the red flag period, a red-winged blackbird was caught by the cameras. Drivers got food, drinks and equipment, and a track sweeper tried to clear the heavy amounts of water to create a dry line for the drivers to navigate themselves when the race gets going again. When the storm ebbed away, the race was restarted behind the safety car. When the green flag was waved, Massa immediately challenged Kamui Kobayashi for second place. Massa made the move, but Kobayashi had the better line and also kept Felipe at bay. 3 laps later, on lap 37, Alonso and Button tangled, bringing out yet another safety car and leaving Button with a puncture. Button may have been in last place, but he perfectly changed to slicks and began making his way up through the field. Meanwhile, Michael Schumacher made a marvellous move to take second away from both Kobayashi and Massa. On lap 53, Massa tried to lap Narain Karthikeyan, but he slid and broke his front wing. On lap 57, it was Heidfeld's turn to battle with Kobayashi, but he damaged his front wing into turn 2, and then the front wing went under the car and Nick's car flew and went into the runoff area. The safety car was deployed once again, but one of the marshals fell on his face and then avoided being hit from Kobayashi and Petrov. On lap 64, Schumacher, Webber and unexpectedly Button battled for second place. Webber, who was trying to pass Schumacher for second, went wide coming into turn 13, allowing Button to overtake him, and the race was into a podium position. A lap later, Button overtook Schumacher for second and now hunted down the race leader, Sebastian Vettel. Behind Button, Mark Webber took third place from Michael Schumacher. On the final lap, Button was gaining, and the gap was just 1 second. And then, the unpredictable happened. Vettel's car ran wide at turn 6, which gifted the lead to Button. 6 corners later, Button won a historic Canadian Grand Prix. This race in particular was both the longest and the best race in Formula 1 history. Plenty of drivers need some credit for their drive. The first driver is obviously Jenson Button. He made 2 collisions with other cars, one of them being his teammate, got a drive-through penalty, made 6 pit stops, was last twice, came so close to being lapped, and then ended up winning the race. Michael Schumacher showed that he still was capable of fighting for a podium, despite Mark Webber overtaking him for third in the dying laps. Kamui Kobayashi and Felipe Massa for the scrapping during the course of the Grand Prix, especially in the run down to the line, where Massa snatched P6 from Kamui, and the last driver to be given credit is Jaime Alguersuari. He started on the pit lane in 24th and last, not even sitting a lap that is able to qualify regarding the 107% time rule, but he marched his way through the field to finish in 8th place. With this race in particular being 4 hours long, I can tell you it's worth it. Fernando is faster than you. It's the famous 2010 German Grand Prix. Sebastian Vettel starts on the front row, but after a shaky start of trying to stop Alonso from overtaking him, throws the lead away to Felipe Massa. Massa is now controlling the race with Alonso close behind. Rob Smedley tells him to build a gap over Fernando, but he fails to do so, and so Rob Smedley had no other choice but to inform Massa the following.
Fernando is faster than you. Can you confirm you understood that message?
So, when the Ferraris approached the turn 6 hairpin, Felipe Massa hands over the lead to Alonso. Alonso controversially won the race with Massa second, but the FIA accused them of using team orders. Despite Ferrari's denial, they were fined $100,000 of breaching Article 39.1 of the FIA sporting regulations. But the result stood as the FIA were still holding a meeting to see if Ferrari could be further punished for their actions 2 months after the race happened. The FIA at that time held another meeting to determine if they should legalise team orders. the decision was made at the end of the year, and come 2011, the utilization of team orders became legal again. Suzuka 1989 and 1990. I'm only going to cover the two main controversial scenes, because that's what these two races are about. So, it's the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix in Suzuka. Title leader Alain Prost is 16 points in front of Ayrton Senna. With this race being the second to last race, Senna had to win the race with Prost 6 or lower, with the probability of being a winner-takes-all in Australia. Senna is on pole, with Prost second, but Prost gets the better start and takes the lead. Senna began hunting him down, and on lap 46 made the lunge at turn 16, but the McLarens made contact and got stuck. Prost retired while Senna carried on. He overtook Alessandro Nannini for first and won the race. However, he was then disqualified for missing the chicane after his collision with Prost. Alessandro Nannini was given the win, with Patrese in second, making it an Italian 1-2. Ayrton Senna said the race was robbed and accused Jean-Marie Balestre of favouring his fellow countryman Alain Prost. Senna was then later banned for 6 months and fined £100,000. After becoming 1989 champion, Alain Prost said that he is more than happy to leave because it becomes absolutely impossible to work with Ayrton. Fast forward a year later, and Prost is now at Ferrari and the pair are at another championship battle. Going into the final two races in Suzuka and Adelaide, it was Ayrton Senna this time who was the title leader, 9 points ahead of Prost. So Prost basically had to finish ahead of Senna in Suzuka, because even if both of them crashed, Ayrton Senna would be crowned champion, because even if Ayrton crashes in Adelaide with Prost winning the race, Alain would lose on countback. Keep this in mind because it will come later on. Senna gets pole again with Prost second, but the grid strangely moved to the dirty side of the track. Senna and Gerhard Berger protested the decision, but FISA president Jean-Marie Balestre insisted for the starting grid to be on the dirty side of the track. At the start, Prost obviously got the lead on the clean part of the track. Senna then deliberately took out Prost in a rather dangerous crash. Both title rivals were out and Senna was crowned champion. This is the first crash that decided the championship outcome. But don't worry, there's two more on the way. Adelaide 1994. This is the second controversial championship decider. So, heading into the final round in Australia, Schumacher was ahead of title rival Damon Hill by just 1 point. Schumacher, despite a crash in qualifying, he puts it behind his back and qualifies second, behind pole sitter Nigel Mansell, but ahead of his Williams teammate and title rival Damon Hill. Schumacher took the lead at the start, with Damon close behind. It stayed that way until lap 36, where Schumacher made an error and clipped the wall. Hill spotted an opportunity to go past, but Schumacher turned aggressively onto Hill's car and caused Schumacher's Benetton to flip at 90 degrees and out of the race. Damon was expected to be the 1994 champion, until when he came into pit and the mechanic spotted a dent on the front left suspension, and so he was forced to retire as well. Schumacher controversially won his first title in Formula 1, and this being the second time a championship has been decided over a controversial crash. But keep your heads focused, because we'll discuss about the third and final controversial crash right now. Jerez 1997. We've reached a trilogy of controversial championship deciders. The 1997 title went down to the wire between the Ferrari of Michael Schumacher and the Williams of Jacques Villeneuve. Before the final round in Jerez, Villeneuve won the Luxembourg Grand Prix while Schumacher retired after 2 laps with broken suspension, so that meant he could win the title in Japan if he finished ahead of Schumacher. However, during practice on Saturday, Villeneuve ignored yellow flags when Jos Verstappen ran out of fuel. He was under a suspended ban for this and was excluded instantly from the event. Williams had the right to appeal, and they did so Jacques is allowed to race. Schumacher won the race, while Villeneuve fell to 5th. Williams later withdrew the appeal, which upset the FIA. It could have led to a very harsh punishment such as an 8-race ban for Villeneuve, including the first 7 races of the 1998 season, and a heavy fine. Instead, he was stripped of his 5th place finish, got disqualified, losing his 2 points he earned in the process. So heading into the final round in Jerez, Schumacher had once again a 1-point lead over his main rival. Schumacher, Villeneuve and Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who was Jacques' teammate, all of them astonishingly set the exact same time, 1 minute 21.072. But since Villeneuve set the time first, he would start on pole with Schumacher and Frentzen in 2nd and 3rd. When the lights went out, Villeneuve dropped to 3rd, but he managed to recover and hunt down Schumacher for the lead. Villeneuve spotted an opportunity to dive past Schumacher, but Schumacher deliberately turned into Villeneuve's side pod. Schumacher was left in the sandbox and retired. Villeneuve drove cautiously and finished third behind the McLarens of David Coulthard and Mika Hakkinen. Jacques kept reminding the FIA that Schumacher may attempt to take him out on purpose so as to be crowned the 1997 champion. Max Mosley therefore decided to dish out penalties to anyone who tried to win the championship by a controversial collision. So, a few weeks after the European Grand Prix happened and the announcement came that Schumacher has been disqualified from the 1997 World Championship, but his results stood and Schumacher was also ordered to take part in a road safety campaign during the 1998 season. Ever since Jerez 1997, there hasn't been a single championship decided by a collision, so that's a positive outcome. Crashgate. So, it's the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, the very first night race in Formula 1 history. Felipe Massa, after getting pole, gets an excellent start and begins to fade away to claim an inexorable victory. On lap 12, Fernando Alonso, who started 15th because of a fuel feed problem, is the first driver to pit, switching to the soft compound tyres. 2 laps later, his teammate Nelson Piquet Jr. crashed into the wall, bringing out the safety car. Both Red Bulls and Rubens Barrichello were able to snatch to the pits for tyres and fuel, but Nico Rosberg and Robert Kubica weren't so lucky, and had to refuel when the pit lane was closed. The rest of the field who hadn't pitted had to conserve fuel, and when the pit lane finally opened, most of the drivers took advantage to refuel. Felipe Massa was also one of the drivers to pit, but when the lights went green, he drove away with the fuel hose still attached, nearly hitting Sutil in the process. He brought his car to a stop and the mechanics ran as fast as they could to disconnect the fuel, but when they arrived their fuel rig wouldn't disconnect. The mechanics finally removed the fuel rig and Massa rejoined in last place. When the race got going again, Rosberg led from Trulli, Fisichella, Kubica, Alonso, Webber, Coulthard and Hamilton, albeit Rosberg and Kubica had to serve their stop-go penalties and Trulli and Fisichella hadn't pitted yet, so that meant Alonso will lead from Webber, Coulthard and Hamilton. Alonso, after his second stop, managed to rejoin just ahead of Coulthard and Hamilton, and from then on won the race comfortably, with Nico Rosberg finishing in second and Lewis Hamilton finishing in third. Fast forward into the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix and Nelson Piquet Jr. gets fired from Renault due to his poor performances. At the time, the Brazilian was yet to score a single point, whilst teammate Fernando Alonso was 11th in the standings with 13 points to his name. At the following round in Valencia, Romain Grosjean would replace Piquet for the remainder of the season. Piquet, obviously feeling hurt by Flavio Briatore, went to the FIA to inform them that at the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix he was ordered by the Renault team to crash on purpose. On September 4th, Renault was charged and the team would have to attend the meeting in Paris on September 21st. Renault took legal action against Piquet and his father, but Piquet won immunity in the end. On September 16th, Briatore and Simmons left Renault, and on September 21st it was announced that Renault was imposed a disqualification, suspended for 2 years. The connotation was if Renault makes another unforgiving error before 2011, they would be banned from Formula 1. The outcome was that Renault lost their sponsor ING because they didn't want to sponsor a team who cheats. Pat Simmons was banned for 5 years whilst Briatore was banned for life, but both of those bans were overturned in the end, and this race led to the second biggest scandal in Formula 1 history. Spygate. Now we've moved from the second biggest scandal, that being Crashgate, to the number one biggest. So, when Schumacher retired at the end of the 2006 season, so came the beginning of the Dream Team breaking up. Nigel Stepney was clearly unhappy with the way Ferrari was going following Ross Brawn's departure. Stepney had also had expectations of being promoted to team principal, but in reality he was demoted to head of performance development. In his anger, Stepney gave away 780 pages of confidential Ferrari information to McLaren's chief designer Mike Coughlin, but since Coughlin couldn't carry all those documents back home, he got his wife to get them photocopied at a photocopying shop in Woking. However, the person who worked at the photocopy shop was a Ferrari fan, who contacted the Ferrari factory to inform them. In the summer of 2007, Ferrari and McLaren confronted and sacked Coughlin and Stepney, and on the 4th of July, McLaren told the FIA that no other employee in the McLaren team other than Mike Coughlin had access to the Ferrari data, and had also sent full technical blueprints of the MP422 for proof. The FIA, after an investigation, announced that McLaren, despite breaching Article 151C of the International Sporting Code, they were found guiltless. A few weeks later, the Hungarian Grand Prix happened. During qualifying, Hamilton ignored a team order to let Alonso through. Alonso was livid, and when he served a stop-go penalty with Lewis queuing up behind him, he stayed there for an extra 10 seconds to show Hamilton how he felt. Because of Alonso's meltdown, Hamilton was unable to get a lap in, whilst his teammate took pole. Ron Dennis was furious and went up to Alonso physiotherapist Fabrizio Borra and took away his headset. Alonso was stripped from his pole position and would start 6th. On the morning of the race, Alonso complained to Ron Dennis about not supporting him and that he was in favour of Lewis just because he was British, and he had also threatened him that he would reveal the truth by emailing Max Mosley. At the time, McLaren had already attended the FIA's first meeting in Paris, and it was announced that McLaren would not score any constructors' points following the Hungarian Grand Prix. So, Ron Dennis contacted the FIA president Max Mosley to warn him of the upcoming emails, and further added that the information Alonso will send would be false. This led to the FIA to reopen the case, and only a month later, the second Paris meeting occurred. This time, everything was revealed, and so McLaren were excluded from the Constructors' Championship and were fined $100 million, the largest fine in sporting history. However, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso and reserve driver Pedro de la Rosa were given immunity for telling the truth, and Alonso and Hamilton were allowed to continue their championship hunt. McLaren were also forewarned that if the MP423 had any Ferrari data, they would be banned from Formula 1 completely. But after Ron Dennis made a public apology about the whole scandal, it seemed that McLaren had learned their lesson. Just leave me alone, I know what to do. It's the 2012 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Kimi Raikkonen is in 4th but gets a head start and moves up to 2nd coming into turn 1. On lap 21, Hamilton's engine shut off, gifting the lead to Raikkonen. 2 laps later, his engineer tried to update him on the gap between him and Alonso, and the rest is as follows.
Just leave me alone, I know what to do.
There's something else too. When Sergio Perez caused Romain Grosjean and Mark Webber to crash, the safety car was deployed. 2 laps later, Raikkonen's engineer told him that he needed to keep warming up all 4 tyres, and Raikkonen said the following.
Yes, I'm doing all the time. You don't have to remind every second.
In the end, Kimi took the checkered flag to win his first race since 2009. Tier 3, Europe 1999 and 2007. These 2 races have got plenty of unforgettable moments, which I couldn't really array in different places on the iceberg, so I just decided to talk about all these moments in one topic. So let's begin with the 1999 race. This race in particular had a lot of build up to it. With 3 races to go, 4 drivers could sum up the championship. Mika Häkkinen and Eddie Irvine tied on points, then it was Heinz-Harald Frentzen who was only 10 points behind, and Mika Häkkinen's teammate David Coulthard not so far behind in the championship either, with only 12 points behind. Pole sitter Heinz-Harald Frentzen navigated the field on the formation lap and all 22 drivers were ready to race. But there was an issue with the light system, meaning that the top 5, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, David Coulthard, Mika Häkkinen, Ralf Schumacher, Olivier Panis and 16th place John Lacey all jumped at the start. An additional formation lap ensued, and this time the light went out, with Frentzen maintaining his lead from the 2 McLarens. Behind them though, there was carnage. Damon Hill's Jordan had an electric failure, causing him to slow down, which almost made the 2 Ferraris tangle, but it effectuated Alexander Wurz, making contact with Pedro Diniz, sending the Brazilian into a barrel roll. Diniz was helped to get out of his car as the safety car was deployed. On lap 17, Ralf Schumacher hunted down David Coulthard as the raindrops started to fall on the circuit. He overtook Coulthard, but braked extremely late on the first corner. 3 laps later, McLaren gambled and brought Häkkinen in for wet tyres. A lap afterwards, Ferrari were ready for Eddie Irvine. However, there was no rear right tyre ready to go on, so the mechanics were forced to send him out on the same right rear rubber. The botched pit stop cost Irvine 28 seconds. McLaren's gamble did not pay off, and so Häkkinen came in to change to slicks, which what looked to be race over for Häkkinen. Frentzen was comfortably leading up until lap 32, where after he came out of the pit lane exit, he grounded to a halt. By the time Coulthard took the lead, it started raining cats and dogs, and on lap 37 he went off at turn 4 and went into the gravel and then into the wall with the engine stalling. Surprisingly, Giancarlo Fisichella in the Benetton was now the race leader, until lap 48, when he also spun off and stalled the engine just like Coulthard. Ralf Schumacher was now the race leader, but he had a right rear puncture, becoming the 4th consecutive race leader to lose the lead. Johnny Herbert took the lead after he came into the pits to change to wets. Meanwhile, on lap 53, Luca Badar, who was running in a critical 4th for Minardi, suffered a gearbox failure, which made him burst into tears. In the meantime, Häkkinen came back strong and overtook Eddie Irvine and Mike Genet to move up to 5th. In the course of time, Johnny Herbert took the win, with Jarno Trulli in 2nd and Rubens Barrichello completing the podium. This race was unpredictable, with unforgettable moments, unpredictable weather forecasts, and Stewart winning their first and only race in their last season in Formula 1 before it rebranded to Jaguar in 2000. Now time for the 2007 race. In qualifying, Lewis Hamilton's right front tyre blew after the wheel nut was not screwed correctly, causing his car to go straight into the barriers. Thankfully he was unscathed and was able to race, albeit all the way down in 10th. So, come race day of the 2007 European Grand Prix, and every driver starts their formation lap. But somewhere in last position, a hero by the name of Marcus Winkelhock is told by his pit crew to come into the pit lane to change to standard wets, whereas everyone else started on slick tyres. When the lights went out, Hamilton got a lightning fast start and moved up to 6th, before getting a puncture when the two BMW Saubers of Nick Heidfeld and Robert Kubica collided. Concurrently, Nico Rosberg collided with both Rubens Barrichello and Adrian Sutil as heavy rain arrived. Race leader Raikkonen attempted to come into the pits to change tyres, but slid off and had to complete another lap with wet dryers on a wet track. He wasn't the only one. Giancarlo Fisichella also missed the pits and went off the track on lap 2, but for now I digress. Marcus Winkelhock is now the new race leader. With his strategy paying off, he was driving smoothly, unlike some other drivers. The rain becomes torrential and turn 1 becomes a river flow. The first driver to get caught was Jenson Button. He's followed by Hamilton, Sutil, Rosberg and Speed. Anthony Davidson stopped his car just at the right time and reverses out and carries on. Just at the moment the safety car was deployed, Vincenzo Liuzzi spun like crazy and becomes the last victim of the turn 1 river, lightly tapping the recovery crane. The safety car was rightly deployed because the drivers had to slow down so as no one else gets caught out. Otherwise, in the words of Monte Brundle, you're in a canoe and not in an F1 car. That recovery crane, whom I mentioned earlier, came to bail Hamilton out of the gravel. Hamilton kept the engine running when he went off at the first corner, and so he gestured to the recovery crane to come and pick him up. With the crane's assistance, Hamilton is able to rejoin the race, albeit 1 lap down. The race is red flagged, and the storm abruptly faded away. When the race was restarted, Hamilton was able to unlap himself and switch to dries, since the weather was now sunny. In the meantime, the safety car came in and Marcus Winkelhock led the field up until the run-up to turn 1, where he was passed by Massa and Alonso. Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, fell a lap down again. The track conditions aren't fit for dries yet. Marcus Winkelhock, meanwhile, retired due to a hydraulic problem. The worst thing about it is that it was his solo appearance as an F1 debutant. A couple of laps forward and Nick Heidfeld is hounding Ralf Schumacher for 9th, but Heidfeld inadvertently took out Schumacher. Meanwhile, Takuma Sato retired due to hydraulics, just like Winkelhock. A few laps later, Kimi Raikkonen, who was running in 3rd, also retires due to a hydraulic problem. The clouds started to gather in the final laps, and Heikki Kovalainen is the first to gamble on the wet tyres, followed by the front runners Felipe Massa and Fernando Alonso. The gap between Massa and Alonso was down to a second, and on lap 56, Alonso made the move at turn 5, but the ped touched, leaving a mark on Alonso's right side pod. In the end, Alonso took the win with Massa second, but the race wasn't over yet, as there was another epic battle, this time between Mark Webber and Alexander Wurz for the final podium spot. Alexander utilised all of the track, however Mark held on and took his first podium for Red Bull. Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, finished 9th and out of the points for the first time in his Formula 1 career. Alonso, before heading into Parc Fermé, pointed into the mark Massa left him when he overtook the Ferrari, and when he headed into the cool-down room he immediately told Massa that he did it on purpose, as in Barcelona, and things quickly heated between the two. They squabbled in the passionate Italian language, but after the podium, Alonso apologised to Massa, and he acted like that because of all the adrenaline. This would be the last ever Nürburgring race that will host the European Grand Prix, going over to Valencia the following year. Monaco 1996. This race was expected to be traditional, with Michael Schumacher taking the win ahead of Damon Hill, but it wasn't to be. For starters, David Coulthard borrowed a spare helmet from Michael Schumacher. The reason for that was because David Coulthard's helmet did not have the double visor device, Therefore, he required a double visor helmet. Next, Andrea Montermini crashed on the warm-up lap, and that meant he would not start the race. At the start, Hill got the better start of Schumacher and led the race. Jos Verstappen went into the tyre wall and retired, along with Giancarlo Fisichella and Pietro Lamy, whom they retired after colliding with each other. Michael Schumacher also retired in the first lap after losing control on his Ferrari before crashing into the Armco. Later, Ukio Katayama binned it on the wall, and the fellow Brazilians Rubens Barrichello and Ricardo Rosset crashed on the same spot. Pedro Diniz became another victim of DNFs, and then Gerhard Berger, who was running in third, came into the pits to retire the car. For a couple of laps, there was no other retirement, until Martin Brundle lost control of the car and crashed into the Armco. Meanwhile, Olivier Panis was moving places through the field and was hunting down the Ferrari of Eddie Irvine, and attempted to overtake him at the lowest hairpin, but had made light contact and Eddie locked his Ferrari but was able to continue. Following on from that, Damon Hill was undoubtedly going to win the Monaco Grand Prix until his Renault engine went up in smoke. Jean Alesi was now the race leader, but it was short-lived as he retired in the pit lane with broken suspension. A couple of laps later, Luca Badoa turned in on Jacques Villeneuve and both drivers were out of the race. In addition to that, Eddie Irvine, whom I mentioned earlier, avoided making contact with the barriers, but now he caused a train wreck involving him, Mika Salo and Mika Hakkinen. After all this, Olivier Panis won the Grand Prix, despite being put under pressure from David Coulthard in the latter stages of the race. The Scot finished second, with Johnny Herbert completing the podium and giving Sauber a free podium. His teammate Hans-Harald Frentzen did not cross the line and stopped into the pits a lap earlier. This meant that the only drivers who finished the race was the drivers standing on the podium. This was a magical day for Ligier, Panis' wife, and for Olivier Panis himself, as he had won the Monaco Grand Prix in a French car, becoming the last French winner of a Grand Prix until Pierre Gasly at the 2020 Italian Grand Prix. F-Duct. At the 2010 season opener in Bahrain, the drivers and the media observed that McLaren's MP425 had a small snorkel in front of the driver's cockpit. It became apparent that McLaren had pioneered the F-Duct, a widget that allowed airflow inside the driver's cockpit that could go up to 6 miles faster on straights. How it worked was basically the driver himself had to cover a hole with his left leg. Red Bull Racing protested to the FIA based on the F-Duct's legality, but it was still found legal as it made its way within the rulebook and not a movable aerodynamic device. Soon, Ferrari and Sauber would copy McLaren's F-Duct design, however they took it too far. Everyone took notice of Fernando Alonso setting his left hand free at the Spanish Grand Prix, essentially driving one-handed. It came into light that Ferrari and Sauber's design was that their drivers would cover the hole with their left hand. The FIA took action this time and banned the F-Duct for safety and cost issues ahead of the 2011 season. Fan car. If you thought the F-Duct was a bit cheeky, that's nothing compared to this monstrosity. Colin Chapman and the guys at Lotus had just discovered the concept of ground effect and launched the Type 78 for the 1977 and 1978 seasons. No one else in the paddock other than Brabham designer Gordon Murray could figure out what Lotus had done, and so came up with his own ground effect idea. He decided to reproduce the Chaparral 2J, otherwise known as Sucker Car. Basically, the Sucker Car had two fans situated at the back of the car, driven by a two-stroke engine. But the car was quickly banned by the SCCA as the fans counted as movable aerodynamic devices. So, the Brabham BT46B made its debut at the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix, and right from the get-go it was incredibly fast. Despite Watson and Lauda qualifying second and third respectively behind the Lotus of Mario Andretti, there was sandbagging, as both drivers qualified with full tanks of fuel. In the race, Lauda and Andretti were battling for the lead. Lauda eventually took the lead after benefiting from Andretti's mistake, and when Jean-Pierre Jabouille spilled oil on the track, Niki Lauda drove over the oil at fast speed, instead of slowing down or avoiding it completely like every ordinary racing driver would do. After all this, Lauda won the race by a whopping 34 seconds ahead of second place Riccardo Patrese, despite Lauda saying he was trying not to show how dominant the car really was. Teams around the paddock questioned the legality of the fan car and protested to the FIA, eager to forbid the car. The FIA, however, still found the car legal and capable to race. Even so, the car was voluntarily withdrawn by Brabham themselves, and the reason for this is that because Bernie Ecclestone wants to avoid conflict with the other teams so that he could get enough support and become chief executive of the Formula 1 Constructors Association in the early stages of the FISA-FOCA war. Valencia Circuit. So, as the circuit has already been mentioned in this tier, I'll give you the main points. So, after the Nürburgring, F1 changed location for the 2008 European Grand Prix. It would be held in Valencia, Spain on the weekend of the 23rd and 24th of August. The track layout itself had 25 turns, 11 left-handers and 14 right-handers, with the fastest lap ever recorded in 2009, with Timo Glock in the Toyota setting a lap time of 1 minute 38.683. Even though the circuit wasn't as tight as Monaco and there was room to manoeuvre, the races were uninteresting and the overtaking opportunities were ticklish. Very few highlights came from this racetrack, such as Alonso's collision with Kazuki Nakajima on the first lap, Raikkonen's engine blowing up in heaps of smoke, Massa's debut win, Lewis Hamilton's pit stop blunder, Rubens Barrichello taking advantage of Hamilton's muffed pit stop and taking his first victory in 6 years, Mark Webber's spectacular crash, and Mark Webber splashing champagne on the podium girls a year later. The 2012 race was a highlight itself, with so much action and overtakes than any other race in Valencia combined. It was the last ever race on the Valencia street circuit, with Fernando Alonso winning from 11th on the grid, Raikkonen finishing 2nd, and Schumacher taking his last ever podium of his Formula 1 career. Outside of Formula 1, and the Valencia street circuit hosted the GP2 and GP3 series, the Porsche Super Cup, Formula BMW, the International GT Open, and the Spanish F3. Sadly, it was closed in 2013 and has never been used again, and the track itself is now abandoned. Australia 1991. This race was the final race of the 1991 season and possibly the shortest F1 race in history. Senna took pole in the dry sunny weather, but Sunday's forecast was torrential rain which flooded the circuit. Alain Prost was fired from Ferrari after telling the team that the car handled like a truck. Gianni Morbidelli would take his place. When the race started, neither the fans nor the drivers could see through the spray. Mansell overtook Berger for second and S8 to pass Senna, but the race was yellow flagged when 2 drivers crashed on the straight. Pierluigi Martini also went off on lap 10, leaving debris all over the track. Soon after that, Nigel Mansell was on his mission to overtake Senna again, but failed to actually do so and crashed. After Piquet and Berger aquaplaned off the circuit, Senna waved furiously for the race to be stopped, and eventually it did, on the 16th lap. Despite winning the race, Senna was far from happy. He said, "I don't think that was a race first of all, because it was just a matter of staying on the circuit." Senna was already crowned champion, but this race was the showdown for the Constructors' World Championship, and so when Mansell crashed out and the race was red flagged, Ron Dennis said it doesn't matter if the race will be restarted or not, we've won the Constructors' Championship. Mansell's comments after the race were intriguing to hear. He said, "Everything was okay, other than it was a complete joke." Despite the race being the shortest, it wasn't actually the wettest, it's actually the upcoming texts. Malaysia 2009. Yes, this race is known for being the wettest race in Formula 1 history. Button set pole, with Trulli next to him for company. Sebastian Vettel and Rubens Barrichello qualified 3rd and 4th respectively, but both of them got grid penalties. Sebastian got a 10th-place grid penalty for the collision with Kubica in Australia, which will come back later, and Rubens a 5th-place grid penalty for a gearbox change. At the start, Rosberg got a head start and led the field by the first corner, and 4 corners afterwards Heikki Kovalainen spun off and went into the gravel. Robert Kubica also retired on the 2nd lap with an engine failure when he stalled the engine on the starting grid. During the first round of pit stops it was still dry, but Ferrari opted to gamble by bringing Raikkonen in for full wets. On lap 19 the rain finally started to come down on the circuit and several drivers pitted for wets, except for Timo Glock. The German had been using intermediate tyres and was in 2nd and gaining on race leader Button. On lap 31 however, the rain got heavier, which forced all of the drivers to pit for wets. Timo Glock got the jump on Nick Heidfeld and moved up to 2nd, not long after the safety car was deployed. The conditions went from light rain to heavy rain to a bloody monsoon. Lewis Hamilton went off, followed by Giancarlo Fisichella, Sebastian Vettel and Sebastian Buemi, which led to the Red Bull and Toro Rosso drivers to retire before the race was red flagged. The race was eventually red flagged on lap 33, and Felipe Massa immediately started complaining on the radio that he needed a white visor because he couldn't see anything. Rob Smedley responded with the new classic line, "Felipe baby, stay cool." The other Ferrari driver, Kimi Raikkonen, famously ate an ice cream during the delay. Meanwhile, they were thinking for a restart, but not everyone was convinced. At 7 o'clock in the afternoon, the light would cause issues with visibility, so it was decided that the race would be discontinued, and Button won his second Grand Prix of the season. Timo Glock initially thought he finished second, but the classification of the race was taken by lap 31, so Timo was third behind Heidfeld. Furthermore, the race didn't reach the 75% required race distance, making it only the 5th time that half points would be awarded in an F1 event. Liegate. I hope you kept in mind the Vettel-Kubica crash, because that's where it all started from. So, when Robert Kubica and Sebastian Vettel crashed in the latter stages of the 2009 Australian Grand Prix, the safety car was deployed. During the safety car, Jarno Trulli went off the track, allowing Hamilton past. Then Hamilton let him back through to retake third place. The FIA began investigating and penalised Trulli for illegally regaining his lost position under the safety car, demoting him to 12th. But the drama wasn't over yet. During an interview, Hamilton had told the press that the team told him to allow the Toyota through. So, when the paddock moved to the Malaysian Grand Prix, Hamilton and Trulli were summoned to a steward's hearing, and it came into light that McLaren were manipulating the stewards in order to get Trulli penalised. So, Hamilton was disqualified, Trulli was reinstated in third place, and the McLaren driver had to explain and apologise about the situation. Austria 2002 finish. During the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix, on lap 63, Jean Todt called for team orders on race leader Rubens Barrichello to hand over first place to Ferrari teammate Michael Schumacher. Rubens was forced to carry out Ferrari's orders and on the last lap slowed down to hand first place to Schumacher in the most anticlimactic way possible. Barrichello led most of the race, and to see him throw all his hard work to the ostensibly faster Ferrari driver was a low blow. It also didn't help when Schumacher and Barrichello swapped podium places and trophies, culminating in the banning of team orders from the FIA, only to be legalised again 8 years later, which I've already touched upon this. Jules Bianchi crash. On lap 42 of the unfortunate 2014 Japanese Grand Prix, Adrian Sutil aquaplaned off the circuit and crashed into the barriers of the Dunlop curve. Double yellow flags were waved, and a tractor crane came onto the circuit to carry away Adrian Sutil's car. A lap later, Jules Bianchi lost control of his Marisha and crashed on the same corner as Sutil did, colliding with the tractor in the process, and was left unconscious after smacking his head against the back of the tractor. He was taken to the medical centre, and on July 2015 it was announced that he passed away. A funeral at Nice was held on July 21st, 4 days after he was announced dead, and on the upcoming Hungarian Grand Prix a minute of silence was held, with Sebastian Vettel taking the win, dedicating it to Jules. The strange thing about the crash is that, with the exception of a mobile phone video and 2 screenshots, there was no footage of Bianchi's crash shown on live television. The previous driver to suffer a fatal accident was Ayrton Senna in Imola 1994, and both he and Roland Ratzenberger's crashes, which will be coming back later in the video, were shown on TV without problem, but not Jules apparently. It is conspicuous that the FIA is trying to obscure all the onboard data of Bianchi's fatal crash because they were at fault this time, unlike the previous fatal crashes. Putting a recovery crane when the cars were going on average with 210 km per hour was extremely hazardous. It wasn't the first time either, as tractors came on the track regularly during yellow flags in the 1990s. It wasn't the last either. At the 2022 Japanese Grand Prix, a tractor came on the circuit to rescue the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. Pierre Gasly just about saw the tractor and evaded it. He went on a rant, saying he could have killed himself. The FIA disrespectfully penalised Pierre Gasly for his comments about the whole scenario. Clearly, the FIA has not learned from their mistakes. Vietnam Circuit. The racetrack that was not meant to be, Vietnam was about to have its first ever Grand Prix. Bernie Ecclestone was the first to recommend the Vietnamese Grand Prix, but he wasn't sure as it would last eternally, as the previous 2 East Asian racetracks in India and South Korea were both gone by 2013. On November 2018, the Vietnam Grand Prix was announced, partnering the other Southeast Asian Grand Prix, Singapore. The Hanoi Street Circuit had 22 turns, 55 laps, and would be scheduled on April 5th, 2020 ahead of the 2020 season. However, the event was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It looked like it would be hosted the following year, but it was omitted following the arrest of Hanoi People's Committee Chairman Nguyen Duc Chung on corruption charges unrelated to the Grand Prix, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2022. As of today, the Vietnam Grand Prix is left abandoned and with little or no hope of making it into the F1 calendar. Bahrain 2011. The preparations for a 2011 season opener look to be in Bahrain, just like the previous year in 2010. However, on February 21st, the event was postponed due to the Bahraini uprising. The uprising in general was led by the Bahraini opposition, a group of political groups who are opposed to the cabinet of Bahrain and the ruling monarch of the Sunni House of Khalifa. The majority in this group were Shia Bahraini Muslims, with the goals of abdicating King Hamad, deporting foreign mercenaries, drafting a new constitution, ending economic and human rights violations, and fair elections and freedom. The country was in hostility, and so troops came from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to crush the uprising, and even King Hamad declared a 3-month state of emergency. On June 3rd, the FIA announced that the Bahrain Grand Prix would be held on October 30th, but on June 22nd, the Bahraini government sent 21 opposition figures whom sentenced 8 pro-democracy activists to life in prison for their uprising contributions. Other suspects were sentenced between 2 to 15 years in prison, leaving the FIA with no other choice but to cancel the Bahrain Grand Prix completely from the 2011 calendar. The Bahrain Grand Prix did return in 2012, but without its fair share of drama. Plenty of Bahraini civilians protested outside of Sakhir during the build-up, with their best attempts of boycotting the race. However, the race went as planned, and tensions between the Bahraini government and Bahraini opposition would not draw to a stand until 2014. Tier 4. Hamilton's 3-wheel car win. In the latter stages of the 2020 British Grand Prix, mayhem ensued. On lap 48, Kimi Raikkonen lost bits of his front wing, coming into maggots. 2 laps later, Valtteri Bottas' front left gave way, which helped Max Verstappen to move up to second. Red Bull were aware of the tyre issues the Silverstone track has, and so they pitted Max Verstappen with 2 laps to go. On the last lap, Carlos Sainz got a puncture, dropping him from 4th to 13th. Race leader Lewis Hamilton also got a puncture coming out of turn 9. He had a 30-second gap over Verstappen, and Verstappen pushed like hell to overtake him. Fortunately for Lewis, the checkered flag came for him to take his 7th Grand Prix victory, fundamentally with 3 wheels. Midland was a Formula 1 constructor and racing team ahead of the 2006 Formula 1 season. Founded by Alexander Schneider, whom himself was a Russian-Canadian entrepreneur, this was the first ever Russian Formula 1 team. Interest in Formula 1 began in 2004, and so they confirmed plans to race in the 2006 season and began their development. At first, they thought of purchasing Jaguar at the end of 2004, but instead they bought Jordan midway through the 2005 season. For the driver lineups at first, Schneider wanted a Russian driver to sign up and race for the team, but instead they signed Christian Albers and Thiago Monteiro. The team also had 3 drivers, who offered them Friday drives. The drivers were Markus Winkelhock, who drove at Sakhir, Melbourne, Hockenheim and Hungaroring, Giorgio Mondini, who drove at Sepang, Imola, Barcelona, Monte Carlo, Silverstone, Montreal, Indianapolis, Constantinople and Monza, and Adrian Sutil, who drove at the Nürburgring and Magny-Cours. The team's debut season was adventurous, but not in a good way though. I'll give you the main adventurous races. The first race in Bahrain was a disaster. Thiago and Christian may have qualified in 18th and 19th respectively, but on their way to the grid, Thiago Monteiro suffered transmission failure and had to switch to the T car and start from the pit lane. As for teammate Albers, his drive shaft gave way on the first lap. In San Marino, Monteiro and Albers qualified 19th and 20th. In the race, however, Albers was flipped over on the first lap by the mighty Yuji Ide, whereas teammate Monteiro could only claim 16th place, and also was 2 laps down on race winner Michael Schumacher. In Monaco, they took advantage from Ferrari's atrocious qualifying performance and qualified in 16th and 17th. In the race, however, Christian and Thiago tangled, causing Monteiro to lose bits of his front wing. In the end, they came home 12th and 15th. It wouldn't be the last time they would come together, as 2 races later in Canada, Thiago Monteiro locked up his tyres coming into the hairpin. He took out his teammate in the process and took responsibility for what happened. In the USA, despite both drivers avoiding the massive shunt at the first corner, Thiago Monteiro retired on lap 9 with collision damage, and Christian Albers on lap 37 with broken transmission. At the Hockenheimring, Albers qualified 18th but got a 10-place grid penalty for an engine change. In the race it got far worse as both Midland drivers were disqualified for having flexible rear wings. In Turkey, Christian Albers was once again demoted 10 places because of an engine change, and on the first lap of the race, Thiago Monteiro was involved in a turn 1 crash, with teammate Albers also retiring on lap 46 after he spun off. Ahead of the Italian Grand Prix, it came to light that the team was sold to Spiker Cars for an estimate of $106 million. The team was now rebranded into Spiker MF1 Racing, and for the final 3 races they gave a test drive for Alexandre Prema at Shanghai, Adrian Sutil at Suzuka, and Ernesto Jose Fiso at Interlagos. In general, the team was faster than Super Aguri, but slower than Red Bull and Toro Rosso. The team was the most disadvantageous midway through the season, with their best finish being 9th in Hungary. In late 2006, Christian Albers tested a Spiker car, and from 2007 onwards the team would be known as Spiker. Jenson Button's Monaco Sprint. After crossing the line to win the 2009 Monaco Grand Prix, Jenson Button parked his car in the wrong place, so he famously sprinted his way onto the podium. That was it, not that big of a deal. Gilles Villeneuve front wing. Gilles Villeneuve had often had this Sigma grind set approach to Formula 1, of him having to be the fastest on every corner, of every lap, of every race, which would often lead to either spectacular accidents or incredible race wins. Nowhere was this more true than his home Grand Prix in 1981, where the camera cut off to him having his front wing in front of his monocoque and cockpit vision. Gilles kept on driving despite barely seeing the track with the front wing right in front of his face. Eventually the front wing came off and Gilles finished 3rd. Mexico 2016 3rd place mess. In the dying stages of the 2016 Mexican Grand Prix, Max Verstappen locked up and missed the chicane. Vettel was fuming that he wouldn't let him past, and not only did he not let him past, he backed him off into Ricciardo. Vettel squeezed Ricciardo and they nearly touched. When the checker flag was waved, a furious Vettel told Charlie Whiting to fuck off and wagged a finger on Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen eventually got a 5-second time penalty and got kicked out of the podium procedure. Vettel replaced him for the final podium place, but after the race he was given a 10-second time penalty for squeezing Ricciardo, as well as 2 penalty points to his licence. Ultimately, 3rd place was given to Daniel Ricciardo, with Max Verstappen in 4th and Sebastian Vettel in 5th. Jos Verstappen pit stop fire. After a chaotic start to the 1994 German Grand Prix, Jos Verstappen came to pit on lap 50. However, the fuel mechanic splashed some fuel on the right side pod and 2 seconds later a fire lit and it quickly spread all over the pit stop area. The Benetton mechanic swiftly extinguished the fire, but one of the mechanics was literally set on fire in addition to the fire accident. He was also extinguished by one of his fellow mechanics. Verstappen meanwhile was both terrified and injured at the same time, as his eyes were burnt as a result of the fuel splash. This would be the first ever fuel splash in Formula 1 history. Jaguar's lost diamond. In the mid-2000s, the Monaco Grand Prix had seen some creative liveries. A prime example of these is the Star Wars RB1 in 2005, where the Red Bull team decided to promote the movie Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. A year later, Red Bull this time decided to promote the movie Superman Returns, where David Coulthard wore a cape on the podium. Neither of those 2 liveries make it to the top as Jaguar's livery in 2004. They decided to promote the movie Ocean's 12, painting both the engine cover and the nose cone red, but the wildest part was they had in place the $300,000 diamond into the nose cone in both Jaguar cars. Circumstances like these would end up in an inevitable accident, and sure enough, it happened. On Sunday's race, Clean went into the guardrails at the lowest hairpin on the first lap of the race, and then teammate Webber had a gearbox problem on the 11th lap. When the race finished, Jaguar came to retrieve Clean's car, but to their surprise, the diamond had gone. To this day, nobody knows where the diamond had gone. The most logical theory is that the diamond rolled down a storm drain. Either that or Marshall snatched it and kept it for himself. USA 2002 finish. On the final lap of the race in Indianapolis, Michael Schumacher slowed on the turn 13 banking for him and his teammates to run side by side coming to the line. Rubens Barrichello won the race by 0.11 seconds, the second closest finish in F1 history. Despite both Ferrari's and Schumacher's denial, it is believed that it was retribution for Austria. BAR 1999 livery. One of the most strict rules in FIA's rulebook is that the livery in both F1 cars have to be identical. but it appeared that in 1999 a new Formula 1 team broke the rule. BAR made its debut in 1999 and launched the BAR 001 with their cars having contrary liveries. The FIA intervened and told them that the liveries on both cars had to be similar, but since BAR team principal Craig Pollock wanted to run both the 3.5s and Lucky Strike cigarette brands, he merged them in one, which is undoubtedly the worst livery in Formula 1 history. Tier 5. The final laps of Monaco 1982. On lap 74 out of 76 of the 1982 Monaco Grand Prix, Alain Prost was leading the race and on course to win, until he blew it and crashed on Chicane du Port, injuring his foot in the process. Riccardo Patrese took the lead, but a lap later he spun off and stalled on the lowest hairpin, gifting the lead to Didier Pironi. Pironi on the last lap played it cool, but he ran out of petrol coming into the tunnel, and Andrea De Cesaris at the same time ran out of petrol before he could even become the new race leader. Meanwhile, the camera cut off to Derek Daly, who had no rear wing and had also run out of petrol. After all this, Riccardo Patrese kept the engine running and retook the lead and won his first Grand Prix of his career in an absolute chaotic Monaco Grand Prix. Andrea Moda. Andrea Moda was a Formula 1 team that competed in the 1992 season. The owner of the team, Andrea Sassetti, was a shoe designer from Italy. He had bought the Cologne F1 team in September 1991 after ironically seeing the team's poor qualifying performance. The car was named the Andrea Moda S921 with the engine supplier Judd. At the opening round of South Africa, however, they were excluded from the event for not having paid the $100,000 deposit for new teams in the World Championship. Despite Sassetti's argument that they weren't a new team and that they purchased Cologne and hired a number of ex-Cologne staff, the FIA did not reconsider. After Alessandro Caffi and Enrico Bertaggia criticised the team's incapability of building a car on time, they were both dropped and were replaced with Roberto Moreno and Perry McCarthy for the following round in Brazil. At the Spanish Grand Prix, McCarthy's engine blew up just as he drove out of the pit lane, while teammate Moreno once again failed to pre-qualify. Back then, when there were over 26 cars on the grid, most of the teams had to go through pre-qualifying. So far, Andrea Moda's performances was failing to pre-qualify, but that all changed in Monaco, where Roberto Moreno managed to qualify for the event and started 26th, but retired 11 laps in because of an engine failure. What happened in Canada and France is truly embarrassing. In Canada, they turned up with no engines because they didn't pay Judd, so they borrowed one from Brabham and they failed to pre-qualify again. In France, they failed to participate because the team's truck got stuck in a blockade. At the time, McCarthy was mistreated by his own team. He was sent out on wet tyres on a dry track at his home race in Silverstone, and at the Hungaroring he was sent out to qualify with 45 seconds remaining and he was unable to set a lap. The FIA noticed the bad treatment McCarthy was receiving from Andrea Moda and warned them that if they did not build a drivable second car for McCarthy, they would be excluded from the sport. In Spa, McCarthy was given a broken steering wheel from Moreno's car and crashed. The same weekend, Andrea Sassetti was arrested for allegedly forging auto park invoices. The FIA had had enough of this and excluded Andrea Moda for the remainder of the 1992 championship for failing to deliver a car within F1 standards. Despite being banned, Andrea Moda still turned up at the Italian Grand Prix but were refused entrance. The following year, Andrea Moda would go on to sponsor Euro Motorsport in the kart series. Christian Fittipaldi's Monza flip. On the last lap of the race at the 1993 Italian Grand Prix, Christian Fittipaldi made contact with his teammate Pierluigi Martini, which sent Fittipaldi into a flip before landing perfectly to finish the race. Italy 1971 finish. Continuing on to rewind historical moments in Monza, the 1971 finish was iconic, to say the least. Once again on the final lap, Peter Gethin was in 4th and overtook Mike Halewood for 3rd, before making a double move on Ronnie Peterson and François Sever. He took the win by 1 centisecond over Ronnie Peterson. The top 5 itself was separated by 0.6 of a second in the closest finish in Formula 1 history. The 42-hour pit stop. It's the 2021 Monaco Grand Prix. Valtteri Bottas goes to pit on lap 31, but the pit crew seemed to have a problem with the front right wheel gun. After numerous attempts, the front right would still not come off, and so he was forced to retire. 42 hours later, one of the Mercedes employees overhauled the wheel nut problem, making it the longest pit stop in Formula 1 history. Ralf Schumacher left on his jacks. After Luciano Berti crashed on the 5th lap ahead of the 2001 Belgian Grand Prix, the race was restarted. However, at the restart, Ralf Schumacher was oddly left on his jacks, knowing that he would start from the back. Caesars Palace Circuit. In the 1980s, F1 was flirting with the US, and in 1981, the Caesars Palace made a deal to host the Grand Prix in the hotel's car park. Initially, the layout was decent, but in general, the races were dull and forgettable. It would host the last two races of the 1981 and 1982 season and was eventually dropped ahead of the 1983 season, but was used as a round for the IndyCar series in 1983 and 1984 before making its last appearance the same year. Formula 1 would also not return to Las Vegas until the most recent season, that being 2023. Jacques Villeneuve music. When Jacques Villeneuve was on his last legs in 2006 with BMW Sauber, he decided to reconsider learning and producing music. He released his first single Accepte Vers 2 the same year, but was actually published on February 19th, 2007. His music in general was mediocre and his copies sold poorly, but thankfully he had his racing career to receive payment and he's still an active racer at the age of 52. Paolo Barilla. Paolo Barilla was a former F1 driver that no one outside of Italy has ever heard of. Despite his irrelevant F1 career, he became zero to hero when he decided to join the Barilla group to cooperate with his brothers Guido and Luca Barilla. In other words, he left the sports we all know and love to become chairman of the pasta company Barilla. The right decision really, because as of January 2017 he had a net worth of $1.39 billion US. Bin Laden Williams. In the 1970s, Sir Frank Williams was struggling to keep Williams alive. Poor funding and mediocre performances did not help, so he decided to travel to the Middle East along with technical director Patrick Head to make a sponsorship agreement with a Saudi Arabian businessman. The sponsorship was signed, and so Williams would be sponsored by Abelard Hotel, owned by Mohammed bin Laden. It proved to be a success, as in 1980 Alan Jones won the championship, as well as the team winning back-to-back Constructors' Championships in 1980 and 1981. From 1982 to 1984 though, the team was a midfield team, and despite KK Rosberg winning the title in 1982 with only one win, the team wasn't as good as its former self, and in 1985 they switched sponsors to the famous Canon livery. Despite being a reasonable success, Bin Laden Williams will always be remembered for all the wrong reasons, and it's all because of Mohammed's son Osama bin Laden that caused all the drama and the controversy. Tier 6. Vettel should have walked it in 2010. Every Formula 1 fan has been whining that Alonso deserved the 2010 title. I suggest you should have another look at the season and see how many points Vettel lost. In fact, let's see together. First I'm going to review how Sebastian Vettel's season ended up, and then we'll discuss how many points he lost and where he should have really finished in every race. Bahrain. Sebastian Vettel slapped his car on pole position but has a problem with one of his spark plugs, dropping him from first to fourth. Australia. Vettel was fastest on all three qualifying sessions, but once again in the race he retired, this time because of a front left brake failure. Malaysia. Vettel qualifies third, but finally wins the race without any failures. China. Vettel picks up another pole, but he lost the lead when Alonso jumped the start. He then famously battled with Lewis Hamilton in the pit stops, and from then on finished an average 6th. Spain. Vettel ends up second, behind teammate Mark Webber. In the race he suffered with brake problems again, but was promoted to third after Hamilton's retirement. Monaco. Vettel qualifies third and manages to pass Kubica into turn 1 and finish second. Turkey. Vettel once again qualifies third, but then undercut Hamilton and moved up to second. On lap 40, Vettel made a move on Webber on the inside line, but heading into turn 12, Vettel turned very aggressively, causing both Red Bulls to collide, and Vettel retired with a puncture. Canada. Vettel qualifies third for the third consecutive time, but finishes fourth in the race. Europe. Vettel gets pole and transforms it to victory on Sunday. Britain. Vettel gets pole ahead of teammate Webber but makes contact with Lewis Hamilton and has a puncture. Vettel then climbed his way up through the field, and despite making contact with his fellow countryman Adrian Sutil, he manages to finish 7th. Germany. Sebastian manages to get his third consecutive pole position in front of the home crowd, but in the race, when he was busy defending against Fernando Alonso, it opened the door for Massa to take the lead, and Vettel dropped to third after Alonso passed him as well. For the remainder of the race, he was in third and finished third. Hungary. Vettel picked up his 4th pole position in a row ahead of teammate Mark Webber, but then after a confusion whether he should pit or not, he was then given a drive-through penalty for violating Article 40.9 of the sporting regulations and finished 3rd again. Belgium. Vettel qualified 4th, but was then later pushed onto the grass by Robert Kubica, lost control trying to pass Button and crashed into the left side pod of the McLaren, and then picked up a puncture while trying to pass Vittorio Liuzzi and finished all the way down in 15th. Italy. The Monza track did not favour the Red Bull cars, and so Vettel only managed to qualify 6th. Despite losing power unit, his engine regained power and managed to come home in 4th place. Singapore. Vettel qualified 2nd and was cut off by Fernando Alonso when he attempted to pass him for the lead. After Vettel's car stopped for a moment when he pitted on the same lap as Alonso, he was then staring at Alonso's rear wing for the rest of the race and finished 2nd. Japan. Vettel was fastest in all 3 qualifying sessions and absolutely dominated the weekend. South Korea. Vettel took pole again, but on lap 46 his engine burst into flames and was now 25 points behind championship leader Fernando Alonso. Brazil. Vettel qualified 2nd behind pole sitter Nico Hülkenberg, but took the lead away from Hülkenberg going into the Senna S and then won the race and was now 15 points behind Alonso. Abu Dhabi. Vettel took the pole he so desperately wanted to have a better chance at winning the title. He maintained his lead going into the first turn. He then won the race and against all odds won the title after the 2 championship contenders in front of him, Mark Webber and Fernando Alonso, finished 7th and 8th respectively. Now let's see where he should have actually been finishing in every race. He finished 4th in Bahrain because of a spark plug failure, when he really should have won the first race of the season. He retired in Australia because of a front left brake failure, but he really should have taken his 2nd race win of the season. In Malaysia he comfortably won, no change needed. Now, from China to Monaco I believe we shouldn't modify any of Sebastian's classifications. Yes, even Spain we had another brake failure, as I think he would have finished in the same position with or without the brake failure. In Turkey he got a DNF after he turned very aggressively into his teammate Mark Webber, so for the sake of this scenario, let's say he doesn't turn aggressively, makes the move stick, and then goes on to win with his teammate 2nd. Canada and Europe are pretty straightforward, so there won't be any changes. In Britain he picked up a puncture after colliding with Lewis Hamilton and fell down the pack, but then climbed up the field and finished 7th. Without the collision with Hamilton he more likely would have finished 3rd. In Germany and Hungary he finished 3rd. I'll leave those results the way they are, despite what Vettel says about being robbed in Hungary after receiving the drive-through. In Belgium he had an egregious time, as he was pushed wide by Kubica, took Jenson Button out of the race, and picked up a puncture after making contact with Vittorio Liuzzi. If he hadn't lost control trying to overtake Button, he more likely would have overtaken him and finished 2nd. The results in Italy, Singapore and Japan will not be altered. In South Korea he had another engine failure, so that means he missed out on another race victory. He comfortably won in Brazil and Abu Dhabi, no change needed. In total he had lost 115 points throughout the season, 63 from reliability, 52 from his own errors. If we add only the points he lost from reliability, then he would have 319 points instead of 256. And if we add the points he lost from just his own errors, then he would have 308 points instead of 256. If we add the points he lost both from reliability and his own errors, then the points table would look like this. Sebastian Vettel would finish the 2010 season on 371 points, 135 points ahead of 2nd place Mark Webber, and he would have taken the title in Japan as well. So remember this from now, every time someone grumbles about Fernando Alonso winning the 2010 title, show them this statement. Jenson Button pissed in Alonso's seat. Jokes, he didn't actually piss on his seat, they were just bantering. Though it must be said, I think Jenson did kind of piss himself when he catapulted Pascal Wehrlein at Portier. Mansell in Nannini disqualification. During the end of the formation lap of the 1989 Canadian Grand Prix, Nigel Mansell and Alessandro Nannini decided to come into the pits and switch to slicks, seeing as the weather changed all of a sudden. However, they too made a mistake and thought that the race had already begun, and so they drove out of the pit lane. Unbeknownst to them, the field was still lining up, and when the lights went out and they eventually started racing, the pair found themselves over half a lap ahead of the rest of the field. Their advantage was cut short by the FIA when they disqualified both Mansell and Nannini. Alpine's disqualification. One of the most bizarre disqualifications occurred at the 1969 Canadian Grand Prix. Alpine, who was a British-Canadian motor racing driver, entered the 1969 race as he had done the previous 2 years. In 1967 he was unclassified and 43 laps down, and in 1968 did not start at all. In 1969, it was the icing on the cake of how much of an awful driver he was. In the race, he was often an obstacle for the faster drivers, and when he nearly took out the race leader, Ken Tyrrell protested to the stewards to black flag Alpes. Needless to say, it worked, and Alpes is the only driver in F1's history to be disqualified for driving too slowly. The Indy 500 was a championship round. When F1 made its debut in 1950, it was a completely different sport to the one we know today. It had weird rules such as having more than 2 cars, sharing the points with your teammate, and so on. But the weirdest one of all, or one of the weirdest ones, was that the Indy 500 counted as a championship round, despite only the American drivers who participated in the event in the first place were the ones to race and not the actual Formula 1 drivers. Austria 1987 start. At the first start of the 1987 Austrian Grand Prix, Martin Brundle crashed his Zach speed with the 2 Tyrrells of Jonathan Palmer and Philippe Streff, and the Ligier of Piercarlo Gingiani crashing out as well. At the restart, the second crash was colossal. 9 cars were involved in the incident, which was caused by Nigel Mansell because his car stalled. Eventually, by the second restart, the cars made it past the start-finish straight unscathed. MasterCard Lola. In the mid-90s, British car company Lola was looking forward to enter the Formula 1 sport. They signed a sponsor with MasterCard, and their goal was to build their own engine, build their own car, and sign 2 drivers, all to be said and done in 1998. However, when MasterCard observed the SF01, they informed Lola that they had to be on the grid for the 1997 season, otherwise they would withdraw the funding. In those 4 months, they managed to sign the 2 drivers, the car was built albeit American open wheel based, but the engine couldn't be completed. Out of all the engines in the motorsport world, Lola were compelled to use the Ford ECA Zetec-R V8 engine, previously used by the 40 team in the year prior, which resulted into 9 DNQs before the team collapsed midway through the season. The team arrived for the opening round of the season, the Australian Grand Prix, and their 2 drivers, Vincenzo Sospiri and Riccardo Rosset, were setting utter slow times, but it wasn't their fault. It was the engines and the fact that they were trying to qualify within the 107% time rule with low tanks of fuel. Alas, the Lolas failed to qualify within the 107% time rule, being over 5 and 7 seconds slower. At the following round in Brazil, Lola announced it would withdraw from the championship due to financial and technical problems, with the team incurring £6 million in debt. There had been talks for Lola to return for the 2010 season, but that never unfolded. Ultimately, MasterCard was at fault here, as they had rushed Lola to do all these tasks in 4 months, which was not possible, and then they pulled out the funding after viewing the catastrophe that was Melbourne. MasterCard Lola will always be remembered as one of the slowest and worst Formula 1 teams of all time. TS7. I've spelt Nicky wrong. Lauda and Michael Schumacher used to be paid drivers. Yes, it's actually true. Niki Lauda was signed into the March team in 1972, securing a £30,000 bank loan, and in 1991 Mercedes, who were looking forward to return to the sport at the time, provided $150,000 to Jordan to sign Schumacher. Though, with how their careers turned out, I'm not sure if you can call them paid drivers. Fernando Alonso's Barcelona 2015 crash. During pre-season testing at Barcelona in 2015, Fernando Alonso had an abnormal crash at turn 3. He slammed into the wall at about 150 km per hour and was left unconscious. He was airlifted to hospital and was into intensive care for about 2-3 days. Another time, there were conspiracy theories that Alonso was electrocuted by his own car. McLaren later announced that the reason Alonso crashed was from the gusty winds at turn 3, but when Alonso recovered from the crash, he claimed that his steering blocked. As well as this, he apparently woke up in the hospital speaking Italian, thinking he still drove for Ferrari, or even going 20 years back. The FIA started investigating the crash with more cameras available and secreted all the footage from the view of the public, remaining unpublished to this day. Barrichello's Imola crash. Imola 1994 is a race to forget. Let's begin with Rubens Barrichello's crash. During Friday morning of the first qualifying session, Rubens Barrichello bounced over the curbs at the Variante Bassa corner and hit the tyre wall and landed upside down. The marshals flipped over the car to see if Rubens was okay. He was later airlifted to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna and suffered a sprained wrist and a broken nose. Ayrton Senna came to see Rubens and told the media he was okay. However, just after Rubens crashed, his tongue blocked his airway. Had it not been for Dr. Sid Watkins' actions, Rubens would have lost his life and we would have lost 3 instead of 2 drivers that weekend. Roland Ratzenberger death. The following day from Rubens Barrichello's crash, Roland Ratzenberger was setting lap times as usual during Saturday qualifying, until he lost control of his car and made contact with the wall. The force of the impact inflicted a basal skull fracture. He was taken to the same hospital in Bologna, and the announcement came that he unfortunately succumbed to his injuries. We'll discuss about Senna's crash later. Alberto Ascari sank in Monaco 1955. On lap 80 of the 1955 Monaco Grand Prix, Alberto Ascari was leading the race before he overshot the chicane du Port and went straight into the harbour. He drowned for a couple of seconds before swimming his way out of his car and into one of the yachts who came to rescue him. He was taken to hospital, and apart from a cut nose, he was okay, and the car was later lifted up. The funny thing is, the exact same crash happened 10 years later, which leads us nicely on to the next topic. Paul Hawkins' Monaco 1965 crash. On lap 79 of the 1965 Monaco Grand Prix, Paul Hawkins went off and crashed into the Monaco harbour, collecting a bunch of haze in the process. His car was lifted thereupon and became the second driver in F1 history to fall into the harbour. Tier 8. Morocco Circuit. Nowadays, F1 seems careless about the African continent, but back in the 20th century, F1 actually cared. Morocco had previously held the Afna and Agadir circuits in the 1930s up until 1956. Then, they introduced a new track, specifically the Yandobou circuit in Casablanca. The circuit only had 4 turns and was 7,651 kilometers in length. It was first held in 1957 as a non-championship event, won by Jean Beira, and in 1958 was hosted as a championship event, being the final race of the year, won by Sterling Moss. It was only held twice and was then dropped by the Moroccan government, presumably because of the injuries that killed Stuart Lewis Evans a week after the Moroccan Grand Prix happened. Max Mosley's dad was a member of BUF. The one thing I didn't mention about the United Kingdom in my World War II tier list video was that in 1932, during the interwar period, Oswald Mosley founded the BUF, British Union of Fascists. During World War II, there was enmity between the United Kingdom and Nazi Germany, and since the BUF and the Nazis were showing sympathy to each other, the Treachery Act of 1940 banned the party on May 23, 1940 during the invasion of France. After World War II ended, Oswald Mosley formed a new far-right party in 1948 called the Union Movement, signifying a softer image but still with pan-European nationalism. Max Mosley rooted for his father during the elections and got into fights with anti-fascist protesters. Oswald Mosley got only 4.6% of the vote in the 1966 elections, and so he dissolved the party 4 years later. He was still in office in the National Party of Europe, however, which was created in 1962, but in 1977 he was suffering from Parkinson's disease and died 3 years later in Auxerre, France. Jeffrey Epstein and F1 connections. It might seem difficult to believe, but sex offender Jeffrey Epstein had secret connections with Formula 1. When he launched his Black Book, he gave credits to the wealthy people. Amongst those names are Alejandro Agag, current superintendent of Formula E, Alan Zakazanet, Formula 1 driver and TV presenter, Bernie Ecclestone, former chief executive of the Formula 1 group, Flavio Briatore, Wylam Benetton and Renault boss, Eddie Irvine, vice 1999 champion, Jacques Villeneuve, 1995 Indy 500 winner, 1997 Formula 1 world champion, former singer and 2-time Euro NASCAR Pro winner in 2021, and Lawrence Stroll, a billionaire whose son is a spoiled brat. However, it should be taken into consideration that none of their names appear in his private flight logs on the Lolita Express. Cuba Circuit. The Cuban Grand Prix, otherwise known as the Havana Grand Prix, was a non-championship event for Formula 1. It made its debut in 1957 with its first winner being Juan Manuel Fangio, but the second would be best remembered for its infamous 1958 race. As preparations for the 1958 race, it came to light that Juan Manuel Fangio had been kidnapped by the members of the 26th July movement. They explained to Fangio about their plans of abdicating Fulgencio Baptista and turning the country communist. Fangio was set free after 29 hours in captivity, and despite Che Guevara and Fidel Castro not being able to abdicate Baptista, they managed to damage his image, and Castro took power a year later. The same year, the Cuban Grand Prix was cancelled, but made one last return in 1960. New York Circuit. In May 2010, Bernie Ecclestone had the genius idea to host a race in the United States, particularly in the state of New York. A year later, they found a street circuit able to participate in Formula 1, and the Grand Prix will kick off in 2013. The awkward thing about it though is that it was actually located in West New York, New Jersey, but despite that, it would still count as the New York Grand Prix. In July 2012, Bernie announced that the New York Grand Prix would come into being in June 16, 2013. However, a few days later the track's contract had been terminated and it was postponed for the next year. The provisional date for the Grand Prix was June 1st, 2014, in between the Monegasque and Canadian Grand Prix. However, on August 23rd, 2013, Bernie announced that the New York Grand Prix was discluded due to the race promoters making an error and failed to provide the $100 million required for the event. Bernie did not give up, however, and had plans to eventually include the New York Grand Prix ahead of the 2016 season. However, it never came about, and the Port Imperial Street Circuit, along with the Hanoi Circuit, were never raced upon by Formula 1. Pescara Circuit. The Pescara Circuit is the longest circuit in Formula 1 history. Its length was over 25,000 kilometers, so long, bumpy and hazardous in fact, that even Enzo Ferrari refused to race his cars there. The Pescara Grand Prix made its one and only debut in Formula 1 in 1957, with race winner Juan Manuel Fangio, and the track itself closed in 1961. Senna Sniper Theory. When Ayrton Senna lost his life at the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, it took 13 years to find out the reason behind Senna's fatal crash. Williams claimed that the steering column failed, but that wasn't the case, as Senna's car had low tyre pressure, and moreover, the steering column broke right before the impact with the wall. On top of that, some unidentified person removed the black box when the car returned to Parc Ferme. Williams deleted all the footage from Senna's crash, and photographer Angelo Orsi, who was a close friend of Senna, took pictures of Senna when his helmet was removed, and it has only been seen by Orsi himself and the Senna family. There's also the crazy conspiracy theory that Senna was assassinated by a sniper. The people who believe this theory believe that Senna's car looked to have slowed down instead of braking, and that the helmet had a hole in the visor, presumably from a sniper. You guys do not understand how much of a professional sniper you have to be to headshot a driver whose car is going on average 190 km per hour. Besides, Senna died from 3 different occasions: the right front wheel striking his head making contact with the rear head support of the cockpit, and the suspension linkage piercing his skull. So if you were to ask me if I believe in the conspiracy theory of Senna getting sniped, I would definitely say no. Tier 9. Soviet Circuit. Attempts have been made within the 1983 season to host a Grand Prix in the Soviet Union. Leonid Brezhnev was handed a letter by Bernie Ecclestone in June 1982 elucidating the possibility of organising an F1 race in Moscow. Bernie had also promised to cover the costs of the Grand Prix, and the Grand Prix itself would be scheduled on August 21st, 1983. There weren't any official designs of the track, though there were talks that the initial track had reached 14 kilometers in length. Unfortunately for the Soviets, their leader Brezhnev died later that year, and that was the final nail in the coffin. The Soviet Grand Prix was dropped from the calendar. Royalty could compete in F1 races. Formula 1 nowadays requires some serious fitness to steer, accelerate, brake and withstand the vast amount of G-force that could seriously injure your neck, but that hasn't always been the case. In the 1950s, when the F1 cars were slower and the drivers were less fit, it gave the impression that almost everyone could drive one of these cars as long as they had at least some driving experience behind them. This meant that even royalty competed in Formula 1 events. The most successful royal driver was Billabong's Banudej, who had a very strong career. His best finish in Formula 1 was 4th twice, first at the 1950 Swiss Grand Prix and again at the 1954 French Grand Prix, and his best finishes at non-championship events were 2nd place at Goodwood Circuit in 1950, his first win at Goodwood again a year prior, a 2nd place finish at the 1952 Grand Prix de Marseille, a 4th place finish in Northamptonshire in 1953, 2 2nd place finishes and his 2nd race win in 1954, and a podium at Silverstone in 1955. The most recent nobleman is Ferdinand Habsburg, who competed in Formula 3 between 2017 and 2018 and took a win at the 2nd race of the Spa Grand Prix. As well as Prince Bira, Alfonso de Botago also raced in 1950s. He drove for Scuderia Ferrari, with his best finish being second at the 1956 British Grand Prix, but he was unfortunately killed during the 1957 Emilia race in northern Italy after kissing Linda Christian, becoming known as the Kiss of Death. Speaking of Alfonso de Botargo, this next statement is dedicated to him. Alfonso de Botargo full name. Alright, so, Alfonso de Botargo's full name is Alfonso Antonio Vicente Eduardo Argelvas Francisco de Borja Cabeza de Vaca y Leighton Marquez de Botargo. Oof, that's long. Hamilton should have 10 titles. It's clear by now that every Hamilton fan says that Hamilton should be an 8-time world champion. However, there is more to it than that. Hamilton should have gotten at least 10 titles by now. Let's begin with 2007. Hamilton's campaign in 2007 started brilliantly. From Australia to Britain, he had stepped onto the podium, but then went off the track at the Nürburgring and was controversially lifted back on track by a crane and finished outside the points in 9th. From then on, Hamilton's campaign started to go off the rails. In Turkey he got a puncture, which demoted him from 3rd to 5th, and in Belgium could only manage 4th despite having no problems at all. But in Japan he took the win, despite his dodgy driving which caused Sebastian Vettel to rear-end Mark Webber. With Hamilton winning, Alonso crashing out, and Raikkonen finishing 3rd, this meant that Hamilton had a 12-point lead over Alonso and a 17-point lead over Raikkonen with 2 rounds remaining. Going into the penultimate round in Shanghai, Hamilton took his 6th pole position and led the race comfortably, until lap 31 where Raikkonen passed him for the lead. Hamilton was kept on the same tyres because the team thought they could save more time by not changing tyres when the track was still wet. And when the rain stopped and the track had dried out, the team still didn't bring him in for slicks because they thought the rain would return. By this point, Hamilton was being unlapped by backmarkers on slicks, and so the team brought him in to change tyres. With no grip left on his tyres, however, he couldn't steer properly and beached the car. The Chinese marshals tried their best to get Hamilton going again, but all to no avail as Hamilton retired when he could have secured the title. Raikkonen won the race with Alonso second, so now Hamilton's lead was cut down to 4 points going into the ultimate round in Brazil. Massa took pole in qualifying with Hamilton second, but Hamilton got a poor start and was passed by both Alonso and Raikkonen going into the Senna S. Hamilton was determined to repass Alonso, but ran wide at the Cida de Largo trying to do so. He fell all the way down in 8th, but climbed up to 6th by lap 2. But going past Reta Oposta and into the Cida de Largo, he suffered a crucial gearbox problem. The system miraculously reset itself and Hamilton got going again, albeit in 18th. His team planned for a 3-stop strategy to have a very short middle stint and then split the final stint. Hamilton made his first stop on lap 22 and was in 15th behind the Honda of Rubens Barrichello. 14 laps later he made his second stop and was running in 9th and maintained this position. On his third stop on lap 56 he rejoined in 9th again and was only able to pass David Coulthard and Raimundo Trulli and finish 7th, losing the title by 1 point to Kimi Raikkonen. Those last 2 races of the season have been suspicious for Lewis Hamilton, as it seemed that the team bottled his strategy purposefully so that he could lose the 2007 title so as not to be banned completely from 2008. Had the team not cared, and had they appropriately boxed Hamilton, then the scenario would look like this. Hamilton isn't kept on the same tyres and they put new intermediates on and leads the race comfortably and then pits on lap 29 for slicks as soon as it stops raining and wins the race on merit and the championship along with it. Now, since we've covered Hamilton taking the title in China, it really isn't necessary to modify the result in Brazil as well, though it is worth mentioning that Hamilton should have been put on a 2-stop strategy just like Alonso and Raikkonen and would have finished 4th instead of 7th. That's one championship covered, on to the next one. Now, you may think I will confer about 2016, but in fact I've got a more uncommon one. The 2010 season had the very first 4-way championship decider, and Lewis Hamilton was into contention, albeit 24 points behind championship leader Fernando Alonso. The final round was in Yas Marina, and if Hamilton had to win his second title, he would have to win with Alonso crashing out or finishing outside of the points, Mark Webber finishing 6th or lower, and Sebastian Vettel finishing 3rd or lower. That of course never happened, and despite the early pit stops from Alonso and Webber which culminated in them getting stuck behind the Renault Vitaly Petrov in 7th and 8th respectively, it wasn't enough for Hamilton, and he came home in 2nd, behind Sebastian Vettel, who took the title from under everyone's noses. Now, there's 2 scenarios that can help Hamilton claim the 2010 title, those being the forgotten tyre failure in Spain and the 2 race-ending contacts in Italy and Singapore. Let's touch upon Spain first. Earlier that year, Hamilton suffered a left front tyre failure in Spain when he was running in 2nd. Keep in mind that Hamilton finished 16 points behind new world champion Sebastian Vettel. Had he not suffered that tyre failure, he would have come home in second, and he would have taken the title 5 points ahead of Vettel, 9 points ahead of Alonso, and 16 ahead of Webber. Now for the second scenario. At the start of the Italian Grand Prix, Hamilton attempted to pass Massa for third, but going through Variante della Roglia, he collided with the Brazilian and Hamilton's right rod was broken and he skid across the track at Curva di Lesmo. At the following round in Singapore, Hamilton qualified third, and in the race he pitted on lap 29 and rejoined 8th behind Mark Webber. A couple of laps later, Hamilton attempted to pass Mark Webber, in which he did successfully, as the Red Bull driver was caught napping trying to lap the version of Lucas di Grassi, but when heading down to turn 7, the pair collided. Webber's car was unscathed, but Hamilton wasn't so lucky and he had his second consecutive retirement. Those two collisions in Italy and Singapore cost him 2 third place finishes. Add up the 30 points he lost in real life and Hamilton wins the title by 16 points. Finally, let's talk about the 2021 season. Now, I don't want to reiterate what I said in Tier 1 about 2021 being robbed, so this time I'll give you the main points. In Saudi Arabia, Hamilton took pole with Bottas and company. Hamilton got a clean getaway, and on lap 10 when Mick Schumacher crashed, Bottas intentionally backed Verstappen off for the double stacks. The race was red flagged on lap 13 and restarted on lap 50. Verstappen was in first, but Hamilton had the better start. He tried to get Verstappen to yield, but Max cut the corner and dropped Hamilton behind Ocon in third. Then the race was red flagged for the second time as chaos ensued behind them. On lap 17, Hamilton started second again as Michael Masi demoted Verstappen from first to third for missing the chicane. At the third start, Verstappen took the lead, and Hamilton overtook Ocon and chased Verstappen down. On the run down to turn 1, he tried to overtake Max, but Max once again left Lewis no room and cut the chicane again. He was ordered to give the position back, but in so doing collided with Hamilton in the process. After letting Hamilton pass, he was given a 5-second time penalty for cutting the chicane and ended up finishing second behind Hamilton. Going into the final round in Abu Dhabi, Hamilton and Verstappen were tied on points. In the race, Hamilton got a dream start and stayed ahead of Verstappen, until turn 6, where Verstappen dived down the inside and Hamilton cut the chicane. The steward said no investigation was needed, and on lap 20, Hamilton encountered Sergio Perez, who was staying on all tyres and defended fiercely against Hamilton. Hamilton eventually got past Perez the following lap, but Perez cut down Hamilton's lead over Verstappen from 11 seconds to 1 second. Hamilton still built the gap, however, until lap 53, where Nicholas Latifi crashed and brought out the safety car. In essence, after some controversial decisions made by Michael Masi, we got 1 lap of racing which Verstappen capitalised to become the 2021 World Drivers' Champion. The salient point is, Max Verstappen should have been disqualified from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix due to his shenanigans plus brake check in Hamilton, and in Abu Dhabi, yes, Hamilton should have given the place back to Max, but the Mercedes W12 was so fast, Hamilton would have most likely retaken the lead a lap later. The whole lapped cars to overtake scenario was messed up, so let's say the FIA sticks to their first decision and all lapped cars are not allowed to overtake, and we have 1 lap of racing as planned, but Verstappen can't challenge Hamilton due to dealing with so many lapped cars in front of him, and Hamilton calmly takes the 2021 championship. So, in conclusion, Hamilton shouldn't have 6, 7 or 8 titles, but 10. I could have made it to 11 if I had in 2016, but Nico Rosberg beat Hamilton in the equalest machinery imaginable. Flavio Briatore half-naked pictures. Okay, so, let me explain. At some time in the past, pictures were leaked of Flavio Briatore wearing an ill-fitting Speedo at some random hospital. First of all, I hope this video doesn't get strike for showing you these pictures, and secondly, dear Lord Flavio, shave that bush off, mate. Life Racing Engines. By far the worst Formula 1 team of all time. Life Racing Engines was yet another Italian manufacturer team who made their own V12 engine, and the car was prepared for the 1990 season. The problem was that the team had one chassis. Their V12 engine had 480 horsepower compared to the other engines that had 600 to 700 horsepower. Their car weighted 530 kg and their reliability was non-existent. Gary Brabham, who drove for the first 2 races with Life, decided to quit, and he was replaced with Bruno Giacomelli. The team failed to pre-qualify for all 14 races they entered. The car itself would struggle to compete in Formula 3000 and Formula 3.50. Only God knows how the team made it to Formula 1. In the aftermath of the Spanish Grand Prix, the team decided to withdraw from participating from the Formula 1 Championship, but at least the car came alive at the 2009 Goodwood Festival of Speed. Spun Bomb Threat. In 1998, An article came from Crash that the organisers from the Belgian Grand Prix received a letter that unknown terrorists threatened to bombard the circuit if Bernie Ecclestone did not send 10 million Belgian francs to their group. The Belgian authorities acknowledged it as a flippant letter, and rightly so, as the Grand Prix went ahead without jeopardy. Tier 10. Ernst Loof. Ernst Loof was an automobile racer for Germany before making his debut in F1 at the 1953 German Grand Prix at the Nordschleife. That was his solo appearance in the sport, as he suffered a left pump failure after just 2 meters of racing. He still holds the record for the shortest Formula 1 career of all time. Jochen Rindt dead champion. At the 1970 Formula 1 World Championship, Austrian driver Jochen Rindt was wiping the floor with everyone else, as he had won 5 of the 39 races and had a 20-point lead over closest championship rival Jack Brabham. At the Italian Grand Prix, Rindt ran higher gear ratios to benefit from the reduced drag, but on his 5th lap on Friday practice, he crashed into the Parabolica and the barriers went under the car suspension. To add on to the woes, Rindt wasn't wearing his clothes straps in case the car burst into flames and he wanted to get out quickly. As a result, he slid under the belts, and the strap belts cut his throat bleeding. He was announced dead on his way to the hospital in Milan, and Lotus withdrew from the race. Jackie Ickx tried his best to take the championship away from Rindt, but it wasn't to be. And Jochen Rindt became Formula 1's first and hopefully only posthumous champion. Jacques Villeneuve killed a marshal. On lap 4 of the 2001 Australian Grand Prix, Jacques Villeneuve attempted to pass Ralf Schumacher, but drove into the back of him and flew into the air. As he made contact with the wall, one of his wheels flew off and hit Graham Beveridge, a track marshal. Michael Schumacher announced Beveridge's death earlier that day in the post-race press conference, and on March 9th a memorial service was held at St Jude's Anglican Church in Bowral, New South Wales, and was then buried at the Bundaberg General Cemetery 4 days later. South Africa 1977 double deaths. On lap 22 of the 1977 South African Grand Prix, Renzo Zorzi brought his car to a stop on the main straight as he had fuel leak problems. The car quickly caught on fire and Zorzi jumped out of the car seeking fire extinguishing assistance. 2 marshals ran across the track to extinguish the fire. One of them was a 25-year-old named William, and the other was a 19-year-old named Frederick Jansen van Vuren. Both marshals ran across the track without prior permission. Meanwhile, Tom Price, who was running in 13th, was stuck behind Hans Joachim Stuck, who was in 12th. By the time both drivers reached the main straight, they encountered William and Frederick. Stuck avoided both marshals, but Price wasn't so lucky. He just missed William but ploughed into Van Vuren. The Dutchman rolled a profusion of times before smacking onto the ground with his body almost ripping out in half. Price was hit in the head by the 18 kg fire extinguisher Van Vuren had been carrying. It gave him a fatal knockout, and his car was still running at high speed and hit the wall and hit Jacques Lafitte's Ligier, and both men went straight into the fences. Niki Lauda won the race and called it the greatest victory of his career, but after finding out that Price had died, he said that there was no joy after that. Michael Schumacher suffering from exotropia. Now, I think it's fair to end this iceberg with the man we started. So, as it has already been stated that Michael Schumacher has been one of the all-time greats of the sport, one thing that no one has touched upon is that Michael Schumacher has been suffering from exotropia. Exotropia is a form of strabismus where the eyes are deviated outward. The types of strabismus are exotropia, esotropia, hypotropia, and hypertropia. Some people might find interesting that Schumacher could break so many records and be so dominant. I find it more impressive that he was able to achieve 91 race wins, 155 podiums, 77 fastest laps, 68 pole positions, and 7 world titles with his eyes being unequal. That's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. I know I missed so much more that I could have put on this F1 iceberg, such as Multi 21, Masters Championship protests. Those are going to be saved for the second iceberg video that I'm planning to make if this F1 iceberg video gets enough views for me to make a second one. So, where do I get all my F1 images? The answer is Motorsport Images. And where do I enhance all the images? The answer is Canva for you guys to check out if you want to. Here's a last good look of the Iceberg if any of you want to screenshot it and post it on Reddit or something. So yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next time.